here and there. The gods alone know what people thought of me. The burnt helper, or something like that. My old life was gone, I knew that somehow, but I did not know what was to come. I think that I must have almost hoped to die. I remember fighting 3 bandits who had been bothering a small hamlet. I killed their leader with his own broken sword. But something drove me on, and eventually I found myself on the banks of the God's Eye, looking at the Isle of Faces. And then a voice to one side said, "You're late." And then I met my first green man. He looked at the blackfish for a moment and seemed to find something amusing. He told me to get in the bloody boat, and the next thing I knew I was being rowed to the Isle by a wizened old man who was spitting nails about something. And there I discovered the green men. And I found healing. And now here I am. And here you are. We have a great deal to do. But I imagine you have other questions. There was a pause. And then Robert stood. Do we really need the dragons of Daenerys Targaryen? Yes, the green man said firmly. But not perhaps in the way that you might imagine at first. They are more than weapons. They represent something. They are magical, but they are not to be abused. That was the mistake that the Valyrians made. They twisted magic in ways that it is not meant to bend until it broke. He stood with not a little creaking of tendons and strode over to the map. Aha! Your map is accurate. A great finger was placed on Hopeman. You know the significance of this place. Hopeman, Ned said through suddenly dry lips. The home of the Night King and the others. Home, yes and no. Yes, it is their fortress, but it is more than that. There are ruins there. Old ruins. I have seen them, Ned muttered. The day that the call was sent out. I had a vision on that day. A vision of Hopeman. And the others. You were lucky that day, the green man rumbled, his eyes keen. Your ancestors placed protections on the hearthstone. If they had not, then you would be dead now. He looked back at the map and sighed. Those ruins were not built by men. Nor were they built by the others. They are old. They were old when the arm of Dawn was still whole, before the neck was drowned, and when Valyria was nothing more than a few shepherds on a hill. No one knows who built them. They all stared at him, and he seemed to sigh a little. The children of the forest came to Westeros first. They wandered about the land, they discovered the weirwood trees, they became as one with the air and the land and the water. They carved the first faces on the trees, they learned to talk to the old gods, and they were the first to discover Hopeman. His face seemed to harden. There was something there. In or under the ruins. What it is, the children do not know. The followers of the Red God say that he battles something called the Great Other, a thing of darkness. Perhaps the thing under Hopeman is the Great Other. All the children know is that it is evil. And that it repelled them, the first time they saw Hopeman. Winter came not long afterwards. And with it came the first of the others. They were made by whatever lies under Hopeman. Made in mockery of the children. The others are tall where they are short, cold where they are warm, white and blue where they are green and brown. The children rejoice over a burgeoning bud on a tree. The others would see it wither. And when the children returned to look at Hopeman, to wonder what was there, the first of the others killed them and drove the others away. And so it remained, the others protected Hopeman. The children stayed away from it. And so everything remained, as finely balanced as a knife on a finger. Until something changed. The words came from Robb, who was watching and listening as intently as Ned was. Indeed. Something did indeed change. The first men came, through the arm of Dawn. And they discovered the children. And then war followed. The first men needed land to plow their crops and feed their herds. They cut down the weirwood trees and killed the children where they found them. The children fought back. The arm of Dawn was smashed. The neck almost drowned. And then, one day, a man landed on the coast east of Hopeman and wandered west. He met another. Who killed him. And then he discovered that whilst the corpses of the children stayed dead, the corpses of men did not. The first white? Robert asked shrewdly. I, the green man said. The first white. And then the balance shifted. As men came north they were killed and turned, and all of a sudden the others were on the march, using whites to kill children and the first men wherever they found them and reanimating the men. That was the start of the long night. The children and the first men allied with each other, because they had no choice. It was that or death. The children taught the first men about magic and the first men taught the children about war. And together they fought. They fought the others. They discovered dragon glass together and together they fought the others to a standstill. And then they pushed them back, in a rout. Back to the lands that now lie beyond the wall. Back to Hopeman. Another pause and then Ned said the words that had been on his mind for a while. The children of the forest, you have met them. We know that they still exist. Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall, met one who died as it brought in a party of giants from the other side of the Frostfangs, but are there more out there? This seemed to amuse the green man. Oh yes, he said quietly. They are still out there. They live long lives and they can be slow to have families, but they are out there. He fell silent and his eyes seemed to flicker for an instant in his direction, but it might just have been the light. These others, Tywin Lannister said after a moment. What do they want? And where have they been? Why such a long absence from the world of man? The green man looked at him. The first is easy to answer. As I said earlier, they desire things to wither and not grow. They want all of Westeros to wither. They would have the land dead, the forests withered and everyone who is not them dead and wiped in a mockery of life. And after Westeros, everywhere else. His gaze seemed to sharpen a little. You cannot bargain with them, Lord Lannister, you cannot treat with them. You have nothing that they want. They do not care about your life. They merely want you dead. As for where they have been, they were defeated grievously at the end of the last war, they lost many of their number and many of the survivors were injured in some manner. You have to remember that they were not born, they were made, they do not heal in the same way that we do, it takes time for them. They slept and regathered their strength. Perhaps they knew that the long winter that lies ahead of us was coming. Perhaps they knew that magic was going to sleep for a long time in places. I know not. But they had one advantage. They have something they lacked at the start of the previous war, the Night King. Who is he? Ned asked. I saw him in my vision of Hopeman. The green man turned his gaze to him. He was a man once. He was the brother of one of the heroes of the last war, one of the greatest of the first men. He was a Stark. The others had taken men before, in a bid to try and understand them. They twisted them. Changed them in terrible ways, but they did not understand them, or realize what they were doing. They made things that just exist. Ned felt himself pale as he remembered the things that he had seen in that room with the mockery of a heart tree. And then the others joined with the thing that exists beneath Hopeman and they twisted the Stark they had captured into the Night King. He straddles the gap between the others and men. He understands us better than they do, but he is still alien in so many ways. And he can do something that the rest of the others cannot. He can make new others. If they can get their hands on a human baby boy, just a few weeks old, he can touch that child, and they will grow to become another. There was a shocked silence, and the old bear leant forwards. There are wildlings who have been known to give their baby boys up to the others. One was caught and killed by the Night's Watch a few months ago. Craster, his name was. There have always been those who have been desperate enough to worship or try and appease the others, the green man said with a disgusted shake of his head. It never works, it merely means that they die a little later than their neighbors, but they still die. He looked at Robert again. Yes, they have been away. They have healed and they have learned and they have refilled their ranks. And they are coming. You should act on the assumption that war will come sooner than you think. And perhaps from a direction you did not expect. The old man leant back in his chair, looking a bit tired, and the others looked at each other with growing concern. Ed Muir. The arrow thunked into the lower right-hand part of the target and he lowered the bow with a sigh. Gods, he used to be better at this, didn't he? He pulled a slight face, took another arrow out of the quiver by his side, fitted it to the string, drew, squinted, loosed and saw it hit high and left of where he had aimed at. Shit. As he drew another arrow out, a voice broke in, I know a great tavern 2 miles away, with a barmaid you should meet. He did not respond, just fitted the arrow, drew the string back, squinted and. She's got long black hair, she's pretty and she's got these great big. He didn't to look over, he could sense the hand movements. He just kept his irritation at bay, sighted and let fly. The arrow hit the target, about a hand's width away from the bullseye. Ha! Patrek, this is more important than barmaids. His old friend made a horrified noise. Archery more important than barmaids with great big. I almost got us all killed at High Heart, he snapped, silencing Patrek Malister. I was an impulsive fool and I erred. We're going to go to war, Patrek, war against things out of our worst nightmares. And I'm not ready yet. Are you? Is anyone? And I've been a lazy fool, chasing barmaids with big tits. Tullies are supposed to be good archers. Look at that bloody target. 1 out of 3 near the bullseye. Patrek raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. You'll get better. I know I will, he replied. I have to. He pulled another arrow out, it fitted, drew, squinted, let loose, and it flew straight over the target. Damn it. He was too cross to even aim properly. He let out a breath, breathed in slowly, and then he looked at the nearest flag. There was a breeze. Quite a stiff one. Gods, he was an idiot. He sniffed, picked another arrow, fitted it, drew it, squinted, adjusted for the breeze, loosed and sent it true and straight into the bullseye. He nodded, pleased. Better. He and Patrek both jumped a little and he turned to see that father was standing in the archway behind him. You need more practice, but better. Father eyed Patrek sardonically as he hurriedly stood and bowed. Ed Muir, walk with me a little. They strolled in silence for a while as they passed along the bank of one of the rivers that flowed past Riverrun. And then father cleared his throat. Stephen Free arrived this morning. I have just come from him. He has pledged his banners and we have had a long talk. He spoke of his father a great deal. Ed Muir smiled slightly. It could not have been easy to be the leading son amongst so many. Of the late Lord Free. Father smiled himself, probably at the use of his own description of the late and unlamented Walder Free. Aye, hard enough. The new Lord Free spoke of his father's grudges. Some of those grudges were older than I am. Gods, the man was a bitter old fool. He turned minor things into slights, slights into grudges and then insults, fact. The man could turn a compliment into an insult. I do not like to say it, but we are well rid of him. He had ambitions as well, or so is my guess after talking to Stephen Free. Ambitions? Ed Muir asked carefully. Then he thought about it. Ah. Let me guess, the Lord of the Crossing wanted to be a Lord Paramount. Perhaps father said carefully. But that was Walder Free and he is now dead. Stephen Free is a different man. He has bent the knee, so to speak. Spent a lot of his brothers and half-brothers and nephews to the wall as well. That was good news indeed, as he remembered his last visit to the twins and the muttered rudeness that he had endured. Does that include Black Walder? It does indeed. Ed Muir smiled. Oh, this was a good day indeed. Black Walder in black. There is a certain justice there. The new Lord Free did not follow his father in another way. He did not bring any of his nieces or great-nieces as contenders for your hand. He sighed a little in relief. Whilst Roslyn Free was a most pretty girl, he had always been afraid that Fat Walder might be sent in his general direction. He might not have survived that. She had once talked to in a corridor of the twins, whilst getting very animated and almost pressing him against the wall with her bosom. Patrek had been no help at all and in fact had come close to pissing himself laughing. I take it that the Ravens are still coming with suggestions of daughters and granddaughters and sisters for me to marry. Father chuckled quietly for a moment, before coughing a deep, racking cough. Ed Muir looked at him worriedly. Father was still not a well man. Father said eventually. They are. And then his face changed a little. One came from Winterfell. Tywin Lannister is there. He pulled a face. Is all well? Cat says so. Apparently Jaime Lannister's confession was enough for the Lion of Casterly Rock. Cat also said that there was a good chance that he will name the imp as his heir. That made sense, even though he had never thought that he would ever see the imp as Tywin Lannister's heir. Interesting, he said eventually, mulling over the possibilities. He would be a less intimidating neighbor. Father stopped and looked at him. Cat said something else. Apparently the imp found the ancestral weapon of the Lannisters, an axe called Rocktooth. A weapon of the first men fit to match the others that have been found, like the Fist of Winter, Stormbreaker and other Bane. She thinks that the sword Dawn, held by Lord Dane might be another, and the word from the Vale is that the Riverlands once had a shield. He stared at Father, the words clattering through his head. Then he frowned. I don't remember any legends of a great shield in the Riverlands. Maester Vimen is combing through the records now. He's as excited as he ever gets, Father said dryly as they recommenced their walk. We need to find it, Edmure. It would be a sign of our paramountcy here in the Riverlands. And it would help with this call. His scalp prickled a little with the mention of the thing that was roiling the realm. And then he scowled with thought. Would the Mudkings have had it? Before the coming of the Andals? Perhaps. Then it might be at Old Stones. But Father grimaced. Old Stones has been stripped over the centuries, there is nothing there of worth. Even the tombs have been robbed. Ah, said Edmure, conceding the point. And then a thought occurred to him. What if the Andals captured it and it was despoiled or destroyed? I do not know, Father said in a troubled voice. But if the other weapons of the first men have survived, then this shield might have as well. We must look for it. He nodded, even as a memory prickled at the back of his head. Wait. Father, I once had a nursemaid who you dismissed because she would tell me tales of the old gods and the first men. And she mentioned once the king who bore he racked his mind. The shield of the rivers. No, it was something else. The shield of the trident. Gods, this was years ago. Father frowned and then pulled a slight face again. I think I remember her. Your mother wanted you to be strong in the faith of the Seven, so I might have been a bit overzealous. And I think I recall the tale she mentioned. I will ask Vimen about it. I must talk with you about something else though. I have had a raven from the foxhold. She is almost ready to travel back to King's Landing. I have thought about this deeply, but I am not yet decided on if we should send an escort to assist with her passage there to face justice. The words were said by a man he barely recognized, who had a face like stone. Gods, he thought, Lysa, how could you? Where did it all go so wrong? What twisted you so amiss? But Edmure said nothing and merely nodded again before then looking up as thunder cracked somewhere to the west. Great black clouds were billowing slowly towards them. A storm is coming, he said, and he knew that he was not speaking of just the clouds. We'd best get back to the keep. Robb. The meeting with the Green Man did not go on for too much longer after the revelation that the others were planning something. Sadly he could not say where or when, just that he knew that they were coming. It was a shock to know that they were up against an ancient member of House Stark. Who was he? Or rather, who had he been? He made a note to look up the records and perhaps to check the older tombs in the crypts, even in the oldest and darkest and coldest section. He didn't like that area, no one in their right mind did. And afterwards there had come the surprises. After the Green Man had stood, nodded to the king and left, with a slightly stunned Father and Lord Lannister, after the king had drummed his fingers on the mantelpiece furiously in thought and then left with his brother, then uncle, well, great-uncle really, Brynden laid a hand on his shoulder and directed, not pulled, it was friendlier than that, him to one side. Brienne of Tarth was next to him and he eyed her carefully. He remembered her from the previous life he had lived. The Evenstar's last remaining child, who had witnessed the death of Renly Baratheon and who had sworn herself to mother after. Robb, we need to talk, the Blackfish. He eyed Uncle Brynden carefully and then looked around. They were alone. Will here do? It will have to. The Blackfish looked at him with what looked like sympathy. We both saw a lot on the Isle of Faces. Including your death in that other world that is now lost to us, thank the gods. The old gods have touched you, Brienne of Tarth. Sent you back from a disaster. He swallowed hard. You know that. We saw the moment when you woke up again after being brought back to life. Brought back through time. Brought back with a purpose. The Blackfish smiled crookedly at him. I'm proud of you, Robb. You and Ned, you've done so much. The call has been heard in so many places. But there's a lot left to do. He looked at his great-uncle and then at the blonde woman next to him. I know, he sighed. The king will go to the wall, and father to Barrowtown. And Lord Stannis to the Iron Islands. But where should I go next? Uncle Brynden narrowed his eyes a little whilst still smiling. You stay here. There are places in Winterfell that you need to uncover. And you must be the Stark in Winterfell whilst your father is away. Robb eyed the older man. Places I need to uncover. You need to talk to the Green Man. Uncle Brynden clapped him on the shoulder and then walked off with his companion. There was definitely something odd about them, some kind of connection almost. He watched them go and then looked down at Grey Wind. Well, he said eventually, it seems I might need your nose. For something. The direwolf just looked at him. And then he sneezed, shook his head and wandered off. Robb watched him go with a smile, which slowly faded. What had the blackfish meant? Catelyn. She had gotten used to the way that the atmosphere in Winterfell had changed over the past months. The call had shaken the place almost down to its foundations, reminding people about things that they had thought were mere legends. And then the king had come, bringing with him the energy and noise of the royal court. Of course there had been problems. She had expected some of the court to be snobbish and look down their noses at the North, and Cersei Lannister, may all the gods rot her black and withered heart, had been exactly like that, but it had not been as bad as she had feared. The call seemed to have woken the court up a lot, especially the king. And now, she looked about the hall as people scurried about to make everything ready for the evening meal. There was something extra in the air tonight. Green men were about in the north for the first time in centuries, and there was a buzz in the air. She'd asked father about the green men on the Isle of Faces long, long ago, before Edmure had been born, and his answer had been that they were highly mysterious, very old and not to be bothered, ever. There had long been a compact about them, a compact that Harren the Black had naturally ignored but had still been somehow defeated by. And now there was a group of them here. Including. There you are, Cat. She turned at that familiar voice with a beam of delight and ran to him for one of his hugs. Uncle Brynden had long been a voice of quiet experience that she had listened to just as much as father. When the two of them agreed on something, then it was important. And Tullys had to stick together. Family was family. As she stepped out of his arms, she looked at him and then tilted her head a little, quizzically. Uncle Brynden looked a little different. He seemed more settled, as if that was possible, and unless she missed her guess, he was a shade less grizzled since the last time she had seen him. He was dressed in his usual apparel for high table, but he bore a brooch that was different, in the shape of an antler. And there's something about his eyes that he had not had before, but she could not, for the life of her, put her finger on it. He looked her up and down with a warm smile on his face, and then he stopped, his eyes narrowed a little, before his smile grew again. Ah, Cat. You're expecting another little direwolf again. She ran her hands over her belly and smiled at him. I am, Uncle. Oh, but it's good to see you again. The smile became a little more wry as his eyes flickered a little. You too, Cat, you too. Such odd times though. The call. He sighed. The call. He looked about the hall for a moment and then gestured her to follow him into a room to one side. Once they were both in, he closed the door. Better that there not be anyone to hear this. I heard the call at the bloody gate. He paused, seeming to wonder what to say next. Cat, I know about Robb. About how he was brought back. You know, don't you? She froze for a moment. Uncle Brynden. I know. He told me. Or rather Ned did at first, and then Robb explained further and, her words stuttered and died. And everything that has happened since then has just, she clasped her hands together. Her uncle looked at her for a long moment and then nodded slightly. You heard about Walder bloody free dying, did you? Ah. She thought about the warm feeling of savage joy that had gripped her on the day that the message had come. Oh yes, she hissed. And I do not mourn him in the slightest. The blackfish nodded with satisfaction. Nor should you. I was there when he had his apoplexy. He was his usual vile self, insulting everyone around him, doubting everyone and everything, insulting everyone there, even his own kin, and then a man from the Night's Watch walked in and placed a cage on the table in front him. A cage containing the head of a white. The wizened old bastard pissed himself and had a stroke there and then, pardon my language. She smiled a little and shook her head as she remembered when the raven had come with that news. Wine had been quietly poured and drunk. And then she looked at her uncle again and at the brooch. "Uncle," she asked hesitantly, "are you a follower of the old gods now?" He tilted his head back a little and looked at her through slightly hooded eyes. "Let us simply say that I know that they exist," he replied eventually, before sighing. "Cat, you know that I was brought up in the light of the seven. But, well, I have seen things, thanks to the old gods. I am not the same man that I was, thanks to the green man. Neither is Brian. Brian of Tarth. That had been something else to get tongues wagging a bit. Well, not so much in some than others. The Mormonts would doubtless like her a lot, should they meet her." She thought of Robb's tale from that other time, the daughter of the Evenstar who had so obviously loved Renly Baratheon, despite his own tastes. The woman who had sworn herself to her and then left to try and help to get her daughters back. "I have heard a great deal about her from Robb," she said in answer to the upraised eyebrow of her uncle. "From that other time." Something unreadable flickered in the eyes of the Blackfish. And then he assessed her. "I hear that the old gods have spoken in your presence." "They have spoken through Ned thrice and Jon once." "Ah," Jon said her uncle in a thoughtful voice. "Yes." He looked at her shrewdly and then pulled a slight face. "A talk for another time," he all but whispered. "Family, duty, honor." And then he raised his voice again, "So a banquet. I trust that there's salmon. A large one. The moment I heard that you were in Winterfell I went straight to the kitchens and ordered it myself." Uncle Brynden clapped his hands with satisfaction and then rubbed them together. "Excellent. With that lemon and dill sauce I like so much. Freshly picked and mixed." He laughed happily and then extended his arm. She took it and then he opened the door and led her back out into the hall, where various people seemed to be awaiting her approval. Tonight was a time for family. And to hold on to precious memories whilst people were still around, because soon people would be leaving again, possibly into danger. "Sander." He stared at the mug of ale and then looked up at the high table. And at the tall man there in the green tunic. The old man who seemed to be revered. Apparently he had once been Sir Duncan the fucking Tall. But that would make him fucking ancient. And besides, hadn't Sir Duncan the fucking Tall died at Summerhall? He snorted, drank some ale and then glared at the high table again. Then there was the Blackfish. The fucking Blackfish, one of the most contrary old farts in the Seven Kingdoms. Not a bad fighter from what he had heard. Oh, and he was there with the Evenstar's daughter, a tall blonde girl who was not quite ugly but certainly not pretty. He looked at the pair. There was something there, between them. He didn't know what, but something. Another snort, another gulp of ale and then he glared at the table to one side. The monster was sitting there, with an empty plate in front of him. There was something wrong with him, he could tell. Well, wronger than usual. Speaking of wronger than usual, the monster was on the brink of one of his episodes, he could tell. That hard old man Tywin Lannister, who was also at high table, had told off two of his largest men to shadow him. Hey. Nah. Not big enough. Not if the monster was in the grip of one of his episodes. His gaze flickered to the ass of one of the serving wenches, as she wandered through with more ale, placing a flagon in front of him but not looking at him. Ah. Another one afraid of him. Afraid of his face more like. Perhaps he needed to find a whore somewhere. And perhaps he needed to drink yet more ale and then stagger back to his bed and wonder what he was going to do with his life, now that he was no longer sworn sword to the little shit. Someone had actually asked him earlier on if he was going to accompany Joffrey fucking Hill to the wall. He'd laughed in his face. No. Fuck no. Go to that frozen hellhole with that little bastard. He couldn't think of anything worse. No, he was free. And he didn't know what to do. Or where to go. He needed to think about that. King's Landing was a smelly shithole that ate gold. The Westerlands were Lannister territory and he'd had a gut full of those prideful, mad, incestuous bastards. The women of Dorne were amazing, but mad. The Vale was full of idiots. The Reach was tempting. The Riverlands were wet. Fuck the Iron Islands. And the North was cold. But he liked the people. Odd, that. He'd have to think about it all. He drank the dregs of his old ale and then pulled his new ale towards him before looking at the tables close to high table. Stark's bastard was talking with that wilderling girl of his. Poor fool. She had her claws in him already, he could tell. And then there was the other wilderling girl, the good sister of Mance Rayder. She was interesting. He could tell that she was interested in Stark's oldest lad. Oldest legal lad, that is. But the silly bugger was being all noble. Twat. His eyes flickered over the others. Stark's oldest daughter was talking to her betrothed, the son of that truly scary fucker Roose Bolton. He'd heard of the Liege Lord and even met him once, a long time ago. There was something not quite right about that man. The son was different, he could tell. As for the other Stark girl, fuck, where had she gone? She and that direwolf of hers. Odd things, those direwolves. There were times when he'd seen some of them padding about the corridors, with eyes that looked far too intelligent. And then there was the Greyjoy girl. She was talking to her brother. She looked like a right interesting handful in bed, lithe and wrigglesome. She probably had a dagger or two hidden somewhere, and if you pissed her off she'd probably cut your balls off though. He swigged some more ale and then mulled things over. A whore or not? Probably not. He was tired. And then there was the fact that the green man was staring straight at him, with an unreadable expression on his face. He tried to stare back, but those old eyes, there was something there that made him shiver suddenly and look away. So he stood, drank the last of his ale and walked away. Back to his bed. He'd decide where the winds would take him another day. Tyrion. If there was one thing that he desperately envied about father's possessions, then it was his cabinet. It was a masterpiece of the carpenter's arts, something that looked like a trunk but which opened up into a small bookcase. It had drawers all over the place, with brass handles and leather covers, and it was something that he coveted. And now he coveted it even more, because father had revealed that it had secret compartments. Some in very unexpected places. With all kinds of very unexpected information. I always wondered about just how much gold is still in the Westerlands, he said bemusedly as he looked at a very old map indeed. I had no idea that there was so much still there. Father quirked his lips dryly as he leant back in his chair. Lannisters in past years have not delved as deeply as they could. I'm sure you can guess why. He thought about it for a moment and then enlightenment dawned. Gold is valuable because it's rare. The more gold that's out there, the less rare it is, so the less valuable. So by mining it at a slower rate than we could, we keep the price of gold up. Father eyed him with what was almost approval. Good, he nodded slightly. The wealth of Casterly Rock depends on that. Be mindful of that. There's also the issue of what is stored in the vaults. You need to be eternally mindful of that too. There is a full list of what is in there in my study in the vault. The keys are always on my person, and when I die they will always be on your person. You will see what is there the next time we return to Casterly Rock. His mind wanted to whirl and he almost wanted a goblet of wine, but he had to keep a clear head for this. The sheer amount of wealth that was in the vault had always intrigued him. Not that father had ever even hinted at what was within it. So he merely nodded soberly and muttered, "Thank you, father." "Don't thank me yet," father rumbled. "You will always have the value of gold lodged in the back of your head, like a burr that cannot be removed." Why, it was almost a witticism, not that he was going to say that, so instead he nodded again. There is also the issue of what is blocked off within Casterly Rock. You know about the passage that leads to the room where we now know that the true tale of Lan the Clever is. There are other rooms deeper in Casterly Rock, in some of the older areas that are now unsafe. I issued orders that those rooms be made accessible again before I left the Westerlands. That might take time, but the results could be interesting. Now this was beyond intriguing, but perhaps something for another time, based on the look on father's face. He was right. Joffrey will take the Black tomorrow morning. In the September. Perhaps in the Godswood as well. I want it to be as clear as possible that this is not something that he can avoid. The boy is a spoiled fool who should have been taken in hand years ago and who doubtless still thinks that he can avoid his fate. He cannot. Father's face was all angular planes and his eyes like green agates. Tyrion's fingers drummed once lightly on the table, seemingly of their own accord, and then he spoke the words that hung unsaid in the room for the entire meeting so far. And what of his mother? He knew that he dared not say that word. Not her name. The agates threatened to catch fire for a moment, and then father pulled the slightest of faces. Ah. Yes, we must talk of her. He stood in a quick and easy movement and then strode to the fire, which somehow did not then burn even harder beneath his glare. There was a long silence, which Tyrion finally broke with the words, "Death or eternal exile in the most desolate place in the Westerlands." There was a long moment, and then father nodded slightly in recognition of his words. Death would be fitting, given the nature and implications of her actions. Her crimes. But I cannot order her death. The title of Kinslayer would be a step too far, a step back to the days of the reigns of Castamere. No, I did wonder if Robert might take the decision out of our hands by doing the deed himself, but this new and sober Robert Baratheon is a cannier man than I had first thought. So not death then. Exile. Father's foot tapped on a flagstone for the merest of instances, and then he turned and looked at him. The question then is where? The location would be important. The more desolate and barren the better. Not anywhere near Casterly Rock. She knows too many people there, people she could manipulate. She thinks herself clever. And the Westerlands are too familiar for her. A location there would require guards, and after time has passed guards grow careless or could be suborned. His face rippled with disgust for a moment. An island would be better. Fewer resources, more isolated, less accessible, more fitting. Fair Isle is too large, Tyrion said quietly. And I know of few small islands off the coast. And sadly there is always the risk of an Ironborn raid that might see her captured as a salt wife. Something flickered in father's eyes at those last two words, something that was almost calculating. That would both punish and free her, and I want her confined. No, we might have to think about the other side of Westeros. There are islands off the coast of the Vale that might suffice. Perhaps a raven to Jon Arryn about this. Or perhaps one of the islands off the east coast of the north. Cold. Barren. Isolated. Perfect. He looked at father. They knew that the coming winter would be a cold one. Perhaps a second long night. Ah. He nodded slightly. I can have a word with Ned Stark on your behalf, perhaps. Do so. The words were not snapped, but curt all the same. After a moment father jerked his chin at him. Discuss your wedding at the same time. I shall want details on both before I leave for the wall. I shall. There was a long moment of silence, broken only by the sound of the fire crackling in the grate. You mean to spy out the land north of the wall? I do. I shall also talk to him. Ah. Jaime. But he might not want to talk to you, were the words that he wanted to say. Of course, he said instead. I understand. Another long silence fell before father finally said, very quietly, what a waste. He looked at father carefully. But he could not find the words. You find the king a cannier man now. It was the best he could come up with. Something that might have been a grunted laugh passed father's lips. Someone once called him the warrior incarnate, back in the days of his rebellion. When it comes to war he is knowledgeable. Skilled even. He knows when to roll the dice and when not to, both valuable skills for a king. In peacetime, he bores easily. Father turned and looked back at the fire. And that was her greatest failure. Yes, he loved Lyanna Stark after her death. I understand that more than many. Your mother's death left a hole in my heart that nothing can fill. Robert has a similar hole. She never tried to fill it, which was her greatest failing. She never tried. No, she wanted him instead. So Robert had to fill the hole with wine and food and whores. Gods. What they could have done together. What a dynasty. A warrior like Robert Baratheon guided by the Lannister I thought she was. Another silence. A bell sounded somewhere outside, signifying how late the hour was. He stood up and looked at father. It's late, father. When will Joffrey take the Black tomorrow? An hour after dawn. I shall be there. See that you do. And so he left, leaving father staring at the fire. Robert. He needed to go to bed, he really did. Sleep came hard some days, as he was no longer drowning himself in wine or beer and then trying to fuck every maid that caught his eye. Oh, there were still some saucy wenches out there that he very much liked the look of. There was a chambermaid who reminded him of one of his first in the Vale, with curves in all the right places, but he still had the feeling that whoring about at the moment would be a very bad idea. Especially given that Lionel's grave was so close. He needed to walk away from her memory. She had told him that. But how? His mind veered away from that and instead he stared at the fire in his room as he sprawled in his chair, a half-empty mug of ale in one hand that he'd been nursing for at least half an hour. Storm King. The words almost mocked him. How could he be a Storm King when he had no idea what that meant? He looked at Stormbreaker and his eyes narrowed. He needed to stop fannying around and do what? It was a sword. An ancient sword, an odd sword, according to Selmy a fucking glowing floating sword, which was bizarre beyond words, but he was buggered if he knew how that had happened. Selmy was still going through the records that his brother had sent over, but they were naggingly vague in places. Hints of powers, rumors of things fought, deeds done, songs sung. There was mention of memories of a book of Stormbreaker's exploits, perhaps one of the oldest in Westeros, long since lost. Perhaps the Citadel might have more information. Perhaps. And then perhaps not. The Maesters guarded their information like misers at times, doling it grudgingly out when there was little other choice. He wondered just what those dry old bastards were sitting on in that bloody great building of theirs. Fortress more like, defended against whoever the Maesters defined as nosy buggers who had no business daring to ask to see any books. He tossed the last of the ale down his throat and then walked over to look at Stormbreaker. The age of it still fascinated him, as well as the look of it. It felt, somehow, ancient. He hefted it thoughtfully and then raised it over his head. Thunder stubbornly refused to growl. He lowered it and then sighed. Naturally this would not be as easy as some of the sagas said. No, in the sagas it was easy. A hero turned up, discovered a magic sword, waved it over his head, appealed to the correct god, had the sword burst into flames or something, fought a dark god, or something horrible from the shadows, triumphed and then settled down with a princess or lady or willing girl who was probably visibly swollen with their first child by the time that they married. Life was not a saga. He propped the ancient sword to one side and then pulled off his jerkin and looked down at his stomach. He could almost see a rib where once there had been nothing but fat and his skin was starting to stop sagging in all directions, but he still had a way to go. Gods, how far had he fallen? Getting back to where had once been was harder than it had been when he was young. Everything was harder than when he had been young. He sighed and blew out the nearest candles, before going to bed. As he pulled the sheets over his body he stared at the ceiling and sighed a little. His dreams had been less intense of late, but still, odd. And then he closed his eyes. When he did dream that night his dreams were odd and jumbled. He was looking for something that he could not describe, let alone name, something that seemed to be eternally ahead of him in a haze of fog. But again and again his fingers closed in on nothing. So by the time that he woke up he was in a frustrated and rather grouchy mood. He knew from long habit that the best way to shake himself from such a temper was hard work, so he threw on his clothes and stamped out of his room and then down to the training yards, Greenfield a silent shadow at his back, where he hoisted a log onto his shoulders and then started his usual circuit around the yard. And then another 5 circuits, just because he still needed a bit more self-punishment for getting so badly out of shape. By the time he rolled the log off his shoulders and stood there panting, his hands on his knees, he had burned off the last of his mood, and he grinned as he stuck his head in a bucket of cold water. Gods, this was the life. Better than that nest of vipers in King's Landing. A towel was held out in his direction and he took it before noticing the man who had handed it to him. Sir Barristan, he said, a little surprised. Then he paused and looked harder at the older man. He seemed distracted. Are you well? Selmy smiled ruefully. Your grace is perceptive. My grace has eyes. Selmy sighed slightly. Your grace, you know that I am not a fearful man. I have fought in many battles. The stranger and I are old friends. When he comes for me I will meet him with a smile on my face. I do not fear death. But I do fear the prospect of not having done my duty. Twice now I have tried to seek out the Green Man and ask his advice on what to do about the Kingsguard. And twice my nerve has failed me and I have walked away. I fear what he might say to me. Will say to me. Ah. He looked at the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard and saw the way that he was looking at his feet, before placing a hand on his shoulder. Then he should say the same things to me. I failed you, Sabaristan. I failed you badly. I did not support you in the appointments of members of the Kingsguard. I should have. You had doubts about some of the appointments. I should have listened to those doubts. Your Grace, If there is anyone to blame, Sabaristan, it is me. I was too drunk, lazy and indolent to help you. I am sorry. Ask the Green Man what you like. I will accept any blame. Selmy ducked his head. Honor to serve your Grace. There was a moment of silence and then he slapped the other man on the shoulder lightly. The honor is mine. He broke his fast with Ned and Cat in the Great Hall, a place that buzzed with activity as it filled up. The Stark children exploded into the place with their direwolves, the Greyjoy no, Grey Mist boy as well with his own, and he smiled for a moment, almost wistfully, as he watched them. They knew their place in the world. To be that young again. And then his mood darkened a little. It was almost time, and sure enough Tywin Lannister strode in, bowed to him, broke his fast quickly and then muttered that it was time. Yes, it was time for the little shit to take the black. He stood, quirked his head at Ned, who kissed Cat on the cheek and also stood, before he, Ned and the old lion walked off to the September. Lord Commander Mormont was there, with Tyrion and Kevan Lannister, and they all exchanged solemn nods. And then the guards arrived, escorting the little shit himself. Joffrey looked as if he had not slept, but at least he was no longer walking as if his balls hurt. He merely walked as if they just ached. His eyes were downcast and he looked as if he was about to cry, but to his credit he did not shed a tear as he started to take his oath. And he made it all the way through, without any problems or repetition. He'd probably practiced it, based on the way that his grandfather's blazing eyes never left him. Tywin Lannister had a face like stone, never moving a muscle, but those eyes, they were the eyes of a man who was furiously angry. The oath made, the little shit was escorted off. He'll be sent to the wall with the next group that goes there, in a day or so, Mormont rumbled quietly. I'll go with him, to prepare the way for your own trip, your Grace. My thanks, Lord Commander, he replied, and Tywin Lannister gave a curt of acknowledgement of his own. He was in an awkward mood after that. Not quite angry, not quite melancholy, something between the two. He strode around the ramparts of Winterfell, noted the work that was being done on the broken tower and the first keep, and then finally surrendered to duty and joined Stannis in his room, with the messages that had come in. The kingdom would not run itself. And then, an hour before noon, they heard hurrying feet in the corridor outside, the barked query from Selmy, and then the door opened to reveal Maester Lewyn. Your Grace, the old man panted, a message from Old Town. The High Tower to be exact. He took the proffered two messages, frowned at them, realized that they seemed to be identical, and then read one of them. Then he read the other. Then he read the first again whilst passing the second over to Stannis, who was frowning at him. And then they both stared at each other. This is, Stannis ground to a halt. Then he started again. This is madness. He replied grimly. But can it be any madder than what we have seen so far? His brother looked at him for a long moment and then he shook his head. He looked at the Maester and then at the concerned face of Sir Barristan Selmy. Send word at once to Lords Stark, Lannister and Tully, that I require their presence at once, in a matter of the utmost urgency. The two men nodded, went through the doorway and that started barking orders to passing servants. As they did he stared down at the messages again. He never thought that he would ever see such words. But, he forced down that thought. Ned arrived first, Tywin Lannister not long behind him, and after them both the Lord of Horn Hill. After they were all in and staring at him curiously, he nodded at Selmy, who closed the door. Only then did he stand. Mace Tyrell is dead. And in most odd circumstances. Ned raised his eyebrows, Tully pulled a face, and Tywin Bloody Lannister's left eyebrow might have flickered just a bit. What kind of circumstances, your Grace? The Lord of the Westerlands asked. And so he handed the two messages over. One to Ned and the other to his former good father, who read it as Tali waited impatiently. Once Tywine finished reading it, he seemed to read it again and then again. Only then did he give it to Tali, who read it and then looked astonished. But this is madness. He smiled grimly. There's been a lot of that lately. Madness indeed. Lord Tali, you are of the Reach. Is that indeed the hand of Lord Willers Tyrell, the new Lord Tyrell? The bald man looked down at the message. It is, Your Grace. I know well the hand of Lord Willers. Your pardon, Lord Tyrell. And what is the truth of this gate? Tywine Lannister sounded bemused. I have never heard any mention of it. A gate at the base of the high tower, for what purpose? And how could it kill a man? Men, from Lord Tyrell writes. Tali sounded as if he had been struck on the back of his head by the high tower itself. I don't know, he replied. And then he looked at Ned, who was still staring down at the message he held in his hand. But from he writes he desperately wants you there, Ned. You and the Fist of Winter. Ned looked up, strain written all over his face. Starks do not prosper in the south, he said eventually. But this is a request that would be hard to refuse. Willers Tyrell writes of his father's last words and the possibility of blight. The room seemed to grow a little colder at that word. Tywine Lannister cleared his throat. This might be utter madness, Your Grace, but given the nature of the war that lies ahead of us, we cannot risk any threat to what the Reach produces. Lord Tyrell requests the presence of Lord Stark. Perhaps Lord Stark should pay a flying visit to the Reach. Ned seemed to flinch slightly, and he knew why. Yes, Starks did not prosper in the south, as Ned's family could attest to, but the thought of blight in the Reach should terrify anyone. Ned, you were planning to go to Barrowtown anyway. Continue on to the coast and take ship for the Reach. And right quick. Ascertain the truth of this. And take that stick of yours. I'll be heading for the wall with my knife. Perhaps this is the stroke that the Green Man warned us of. Ned stared at him for a long moment. And then he reluctantly nodded. Chapter 43, Chapter 43. Chapter text. The Daeron section was again written by Sada, who as always has my thanks for such an interesting and well-written character that fits in so well to Robb Returns. Daeron. As the Blue Whale approached White Harbor, he let out a sigh of relief. They had stayed in Gulltown only 2 days to find another ship, and the rough and chilly waters of the Bight had taken its toll on the Dornishmen, who were not used to such climes. As the ship sailed further into the mouth of the White Knife, he saw Seal Rock and the ruined ring fort atop the island passing him by. Soon the Wolf's Den came into view. The ancient fortress was the only thing that was not white in the city, though the white houses that clung to the sides of the fortress seemed to give it enough white color for the Mondaelis' liking. The vast outer harbor could be seen below it, with ships of every kind coming and going. Nearer to the city was the inner harbor, protected by a high and heavily fortified wall built on the jetty, and the Wolf's Den from the outer harbor. He could also see Newcastle and the September of the Snows from a distance, with the statues of the Seven decorating its pale dome. As the Blue Whale continued towards the city's inner harbor, the smell of raw fish and the sea only grew stronger, which Daeron found to be strangely comforting, as if the sea had gone to sleep with under a blanket of sea foam on the northern shore. When the ship finally reached the docks, Daeron's men were only too eager to disembark. As the Dornishmen made their way through the fish market, they spotted who could only be Lord Wyman and several of his guardsmen who, to their amazement, carried shining steel tridents instead of spears or swords, waiting at a gate that led to the walled city. He was genuinely surprised to be greeted in this way. As a Southron lord, he had expected to be received by one of Lord Mondaelis' sons or grandsons, not the Lord of White Harbor himself. He was also amazed at the size of the man. Lord Mondaeli was perhaps the largest man he had ever seen. And as the Dornish company came closer to the Seal Gate, Lord Wyman greeted him with a voice that was just as immense as the man himself. "My lord. Welcome to White Harbor. Or should I say, the North?" He boomed. "You Dornishmen haven't been half as far north before, I presume." Taken aback by the volume of his voice, Daeron replied curtly, "Yes." He quickly remembered his manners however, and suddenly added, "Oh. And, thank you for your hospitality, my lord. My men and I greatly appreciate it, especially since I know White Harbor is increasingly busy." Your gratitude is much appreciated. Lord Mondale then turned and motioned to follow him through the seal gate, and also commanded several servants to take him and his men's bags. Entering the walled city, they first passed through Fishfoot Yard, which sported a magnificent fountain with a statue of a merman with a broken trident in the center of the town. However, what caught Daeron's attention the most was just how bustling with activity the city really was. The small folk were practically shoulder to shoulder carrying all manner of goods, iron, grain, weapons, livestock and everything in between. Merchants crowded the streets trying to sell their goods and smiths could be heard in their workshops. The city was truly alive with activity. Their lordly entourage was given ample space to walk as many of the small folk made way for and greeted their lord with utmost respect. To his surprise, Lord Mondale greeted them back. Lord Wyman then continued to converse with Daeron. We have received many a traveller coming northwards, including His Grace the King, and another Dornishman Lord Dane, was it? Are you acquainted with his lordship? Ned again, he stumbled over his words. I mean Lord Dane, is my cousin by my grandmother. Lord Mondale's thick brown eyebrows looked as if they would jump off of his face when he turned to face him. A brief moment passed before he replied. Your cousin. Lord Mondale returned to his immense tone. Beg your pardon my lord, but you two look nothing alike. Lord Mondale scanned Daeron up and down. Apart from your eyes, that is. Daeron smirked. Remembering his time at the Water Gardens, he recalled how all the other children, noble and low-born alike, would balk at him and Ned when they said they were kin. Apart from their almost identical bluish-purple eyes, the two young Dornish lords shared almost no similar physical characteristics. Ned was a short, stony Dornishman with pale blonde hair while Daeron was a sandy Dornishman, well over 6 feet tall and had a mop of curly, jet-black hair. My lord, you are right. Daeron said, his grin still stuck to his face. As they made their way through the city he admired just how exceptionally clean and well organized it was, with wide cobbled streets, fine white buildings, large signs and only the smell of the sea to fill your nostrils, and all this despite the immense crowds. The lordly entourage was soon in sight of the castle stair, which was a long, stepped street paved with white stone that led up to Newcastle, the Mondale's immense keep overlooking the entire city. He saw that, flanking the castle stair were mermaids carved out of marble holding bowls of fire which illuminated the pathway in the evening. He had never seen a city such as this, though to be fair, he had never seen many cities anyway other than Plankai Town and Gull Town. After the two lords had walked up the castle stair a good distance, Lord Mondale's expression shifted to something more serious as he began to speak again. So the call was heard in dawn. Daeron's smile quickly leapt from his face when he replied. Yes, my lord. Though not as loudly as one would have hoped. Many of my fellow lords still doubt it even went out, though I know the stony Dornish were very receptive to it. A frown came upon the Lord of White Harbour's face. A shame that is. The realm needs as much help as it can get. And you, I presume, felt it strongly. I did. He said it with a hint of defiance, as Daeron knew that North was cold and bred cold, hard men who were very skeptical of outsiders. He deserved respect from them, he had come all the way across Westeros and he be damned to the 7 hells if he didn't get it. As the party approached the gates of Newcastle, Daeron could see several people waiting for him and Lord Mondale. As they approached, Lord Mondale's voice boomed again. My Lord Vaith, I must introduce you to my family. The eldest Mondale's bright smile returned. The first and largest man appeared to be a younger version of Lord Mondale. He was not as fat as his father but certainly balder, with the only hair on his face being his large walrus moustache. Next to him were 2 young ladies and an older one appearing to be his daughters and his wife, who was plump, but not fat, and had bright yellow hair. This is my firstborn son, Sir Willis, his wife Lady Leona, and my 2 granddaughters Winifred and Wyler. The family bowed, and he did the same. Winifred, the elder granddaughter who was very pretty, shot a smile at Daeron that made him blush and butterflies enter his stomach. Girls were never his strong suit, that was always Ned's strength more than his. Lord Mondale motioned to his other son who was not as fat nor as bald as his brother, and had a slim woman about the same age as him on his arm. She had dark brown hair, almost black, and sharp attractive features. She appeared to be recently with child as well. Daeron could not figure out why, but he thought she seemed to have a bit of Isozi in her. "This is Sir Wendell, my second-born, and his wife Lady Lyra, formerly Lady Redstock." That explained it. He had heard from sailors and merchants in Gulltown that the Redstocks had returned from Essos with the Company of the Rose, along with many other old and formerly extinct northern families. Lord Mondaly walked further to the right, introducing his extended family. A third Mondaly man in armor, still large but made of more muscle than fat, stood next to the other two with a stern look on his face and his left hand gripping his silver trident. "My cousin Sir Marlon, captain of the garrison here at White Harbour." Lord Mondaly then motioned to a fourth Mondaly man, who was also stout and younger than the others, and his wife, both of whom looked rather Isozi as well. They had a restless group of triplets at their feet, 2 boys and a girl, who couldn't have been more than 5 years old. And Sir Godric, recently arrived from Essos, his wife Lady Alyra and their children, Wyndyn, Wylan and Alice. Just as he finished introducing his family, the gates to Newcastle swung open. Almost as soon as they entered, the triplets began sprinting down the hall and their mother raising her skirts chased after them. Sir Godric then began to laugh with that booming voice that all Mondalis seemed to have. Lord Wyman then began to speak with Daeron again, the two lords walking side by side at the head of the Mondaly family. "I assume you are very hungry from a long journey, my lord. The servants have already prepared dinner for all of us, and I would invite you to dine with my family this evening." "It would be my pleasure, my lord," he replied, smiling again. Thank the Seven, he was famished. As they walked through the halls of Newcastle, Daeron observed on the walls many banners, broken shields and ancient swords from houses which had been defeated by House Mondaly. Bolton, Greystock, Peake, Gardiner, and Dane. Daeron paused at the tattered purple banner, and Lord Mondaly noticed his confusion. We fought the kings of the Torrentine when House Mondaly still held Dunstanbury. When the Starfire burned Old Town, the Mondalis helped drive him back to Starfall at the cost of many Mondaly lives. This banner was taken at the Battle of the Laughing Ridge in the foothills of the Red Mountains, which was one of the Starfire's worst defeats, which my ancestor Wyram Mondaly inflicted." Lord Mondaly then shot Daeron a wicked smirk. Daeron was surprised at that. He had almost forgotten that the Mondalis were originally from the Reach, and were deeply intertwined with its ancient history. "I wonder what Ned had to say about this," he thought. Soon after his tour of Newcastle, Daeron asked to be led to his room. He then changed into a fine dark grey silk doublet and trousers to prepare for dinner. As he made his way to the Merman's Court, he could smell the aromas wafting from the kitchen nearby. Even from just outside of the Great Hall, Daeron could distinguish the different foods being prepared: eels, crabs, clams, various fish, lobsters, pork, beef and sausages. He could also smell the various fine eastern spices that one could only acquire in the markets of a major port city. All of it made his mouth water. When he entered the hall, Daeron was awestruck. On the walls, the ceiling and the floor there was incredible art that depicted in great detail all myriad creatures of the sea. He had never seen anything like it, and was mesmerized by the detail and beauty of it all. "Marvelous, isn't it?" Daeron replied, without giving a second thought to who he was speaking to. "Never thought I'd see it in my lifetime." That stole Daeron's attention away from the murals. He jumped slightly as Sir Godric had seemingly appeared out of nowhere right next to him. Sir Godric chuckled a bit, and Daeron turned a shade of red. "Do not worry, I did the same when I first saw it," Sir Godric said through a grin. "Let us take our seats." He was seated very close to Lord Mondaly, right next to his granddaughters in fact, but he was too focused on the smell of the arriving food to have noticed that. Daeron had never particularly enjoyed seafood, but the Mondaly chefs had somehow made him change his mind that night. After the seafood, a variety of salted and deliciously spiced meats were served and he practically inhaled all of it. He had never been particularly fond of ale as well, though he washed his many meals down with several cups of the stuff. Perhaps it was the fact that he was practically starved after a long sea journey of eating nothing but salted beef and bread, but this was one of the best meals he'd had in a long time. After he had finished, Daeron slumped back in his chair and looked around the table to see the Mondalis, especially the men, continue eating and conversing. This brought him a pang of sadness, as he had never had a large family, only his grandmother and Ned. Perhaps one day, though. Perhaps one day. The vast majority of the discussion however seemed to be involving northern defenses and White Harbor's management and economy, though sometimes they did crack a jape here and there. And even the women, he overheard, spoke of marriage alliances for their daughters with other northern houses. Daron stayed in White Harbor for the next week, continuing to feast, converse and wander around the city. He had made sure not to stop training with his Valyrian steel blade, and fortunately Sir Marlon and Sir Godric were very glad to instruct him in the northern ways of combat. Daron was actually enjoying himself somewhat despite the biting cold, as he was fed well and enjoyed training with his sword. All of it seemed to make the fact that the living dead were marching on the realm seem distant and faint. However, that came to an abrupt end when Lord Mondaly insisted that he see the white head that had been left in White Harbor. Apparently Lord Stark had wanted it to stay here, so that sailors and merchants would spread the word across Westeros and the world. He saw it on his last day in White Harbor, before he made his way to Castle Sewin, and Sir Marlon personally escorted him to it in the Wolf's Den, which was White Harbor's prison. Personally, Daron had expected the head to be a mess of rotting flesh that was barely held together, and which could do little more than twitch and grunt, while stinking quite a lot. A mess of rotting flesh it was, though it did significantly more than just twitch and grunt. Upon approaching the cage, the head's eyes shot open to reveal deep blue orbs, seemingly frozen in its eyes, and its mouth opened to reveal rotting teeth that it bore at him like a feral beast. He jumped back, instinctively drawing his sword. The white head then began to screech, even louder than before. Gathering himself, Daron looked at the head closer, and put his sword back in its sheath. The head stopped its screeching, but still growled and snapped at his face. "Don't get too close, my lord. We've had several men who've lost fingers to that thing." Sir Marlon spat in contempt. "I know. It seems to have calmed down, though I don't know." Daron hastily unsheathed his sword fully and brought it near to the head when he figured it out. The white's blue eyes reflected off of the dark blade vividly, though that was not what Daron sought to test. The head screeched once more and shook the cage violently as Daron slowly brought Truth closer to the cage, and the shaking almost undid the chains that held it to the pedestal on which the cage sat. "You're more clever than I thought, my lord," Sir Marlon said with a smile. Daron gave a smirk of his own in reply. Word from Lord Stark said that several months ago, when his sons led a party to the Night Fort, they were attacked by a band of whites and others. 3 of them were carrying Valyrian steel blades, and they found out that they are very effective at killing others. Interesting. To say that he was glad that he had brought Truth along with him was an understatement. Having one of the only weapons in the world that can kill and other was a comfort that he would gladly take, and he thanked the Seven for it. But now, he found himself even doubting the Seven's very existence. Daron had always been loyal to the faith, but never particularly fervent. He did listen to the Septons and prayed every once in a while, but this made him doubt what he had been taught his whole life. While he was pondering at the white head, suddenly, almost as if it was being shown to him, an image of a weirwood sapling sprouting out of the sands of dawn flashed in his mind. Gendry. No one knew what to do with him. Which was a fair point, because he barely knew what to do with himself. They'd moved him to a slightly better room, which was still a lot better than anything he was used to. There was even a small mirror to shave with. It was very odd to see his face in it. He'd been used to small plates of shiny bronze now and then. He was the king's bastard son. He was sitting in that shadowy bit between those 2 last words. Some viewed him as a bit of dirt under their boot. Others viewed him as almost important. Because no one knew what to bloody do with him. So he was doing what he'd been doing for years now, which was standing in the forge and banging the shit out of a piece of metal. Well, shaping it. And right now it looked like shit on a stick. He reduced the power of his blows a bit and concentrated on where he was pounding. That was better. It was going to be a warhammer. Hey. Why not? Something that could be used to smash a white's head into its rib cage. He kept hammering, shaping the metal with his blows. This was what he was used to. The head of the hammer went back into the coals of the forge and he pumped hard on the bellows as he watched the color of the flames carefully. Steady. He had to have a steady flame. When the metal was the right color he pulled it out, put it back on the anvil and pounded on it again, more carefully this time. That was better. You less pissed off now? It was Mikan. The old man was standing by the door, a wry look on his face. I might be, Gendry muttered. People keep looking at me funny. You looking over your shoulder as much as before? Ah. That was a point. A bit, he confessed. But not as much as before. Good, because you were getting bloody jumpy. Mikan looked around and lowered his voice a bit. And that Lannister brat's going to be gone soon, as he's not the king's son. Off to the wall and the Night's Watch. He thought about that little blonde shit dressed in black in what he'd been told was a massive wall of ice. Good riddance, he grunted and then went back to shaping the warhammer. Mikan looked at him for a moment and then nodded firmly before getting to work on his own work, another spearhead. Gendry lost himself in the metal and the heat for a while, as he finished off the head of the warhammer. It was a brutal thing, like all warhammers. And as he slid it into the right quench barrel he wondered why he had made it. As he looked around the room and wondered what to do next, a head appeared at the door, a familiar one. Shireen peered in carefully, looked about and then gazed at him. Have you seen the terrible threesome, Gendry, Master Mikan? He shook his head, as did Mikan, and his cousin groaned. They're somewhere out there and I can't find them. And they're plotting something, I know they are. If you see them, will you let me know? He grinned at her. You're like a mother hen for those three, Shireen, you know that. Shireen just looked at him. Then she sighed. Someone has to keep an eye on them. Just like someone has to keep an eye on you. Are you alright? His grin flickered. I'm fine. He's not fine, Mikan grunted. He doesn't know what to do with himself. Shireen looked at him again. She seemed to be counting to 10 in her head. You are Uncle Robert the King's natural son. Wait until Uncle Robert decides what to do with you. He stared at her, his eyes widening. Do with me? His cousin nodded. You might be his heir. Or he might make Edric his heir with you after him. But he will keep you close, Gendry. He has to. You're his son. That familiar sick feeling of horror crept over him. I don't want to be a prince, Shireen. I don't know how to. I'm just a bloody blacksmith. Once again his cousin just stared at him. Then she smiled at him. You're Uncle Robert's son. And my cousin. You're a good man, you're Gendry Strongarm. All you have to be is just. Gendry. He looked at her for a long moment. How did you get to be so wise? Practice, she said pertly. I need to find those three troublemakers. And with that she turned and left. Gendry watched her go with an odd feeling, a combination of fondness and bemusement. Mikan on the other hand was just amused, because he laughed openly and shook his head. That one's a right handful, isn't she? The old gods help the man she marries, she'll ride over him roughshod. Might let him think otherwise though. The old man glanced at him. She's right though, lad. Just be who you are. You can't do nothing else but that. The long night's coming and there's the others to deal with. And by the time that's done, who know what you'll be used to. Take each day as it comes, lad. He sighed and looked at the warhammer he had made again. And then he almost jumped out of his skin, because a voice behind him said, words of wisdom, all. The two men turned. The green man was standing there in a corner, next to the other door. How had he entered so quietly? He was about to open his mouth to ask what he wanted, when old green-cloaked bugger tossed something at him. He caught it one-handed, almost dropping it in bemusement. It was a worn piece of armor, part of a gauntlet perhaps. It was metal steel, with a bronze inlay and runes. I need that replaced, the green man rumbled. Gendry looked at it helplessly and was about to hand it over to Mikan when the green man spoke again. Gendry Strongarm must do it. I must. You must. Mikan, you need to keep making your halberds. The others are coming. And with that he left through the door. Baffled, Gendry looked at the closing door, then at the piece of armor and then at Mikan, who shrugged. Don't ask me, lad. Green men haven't been seen outside the Isle of Faces for centuries. So he just shrugged himself and then looked at the piece of armor. Life was getting odder by the day. Theon. By the time that a giggling Roz collapsed off the top of him and fell into the bed by his side, he had stopped seeing double. Just about. She looked down between her legs and then looked back at him with her eyebrows raised. Saving it up for me, were you, my lord? He grinned as his breathing slowed a little. Been too long, Roz. You been too busy courting the ladies of the court. He blew a raspberry. Gods, what ladies? The Westerland's snobs. The scattering of storm ladies. He shook his head, sweaty hair flipping about. And the less said about the queen the better. Snobby cold bitch even before she fell from grace. Roz shuddered. Fucking her own brother. Having his children. Beggar's belief. She wrinkled her nose. Southern perverts. They're not all like that, he said chidingly. Not like us here in the north. Us here in the north. Ah, you're a man of the north now, my lord, she giggled, her breasts shaking. Lord Greymist. You've almost called my Theon Greyjoy twice tonight, he said with a smile. I'm of the north now. And where will your keep be, my lord? On the stony shore. And I will build it high and strong, and build a town next to that, so that the shipyards I build there as well will be fully manned as I build the Starks a great fleet. Roz looked at him, her head tilted to one side. Ah, now there's the old Theon Greyjoy I remember. You and your plans. And this rattled him, that reference to the old him. Something of what he felt must have shown on his face, because her smile faded. What? I'm not boasting, Roz. I'm not. I will do it. He fingered the little weirwood pendant around his neck. I have sworn it by the old gods. She stirred uneasily next to him. That tale you told of how you got that pendant, it still gives me the colliwobles. And I know you promised, it's just that you always had such plans in the old days. He stared grimly at the ceiling. I know. And then he sighed. I was a boastful twat. She looked at him levelly and he stirred a little. I am not still being a boastful twat in all my talk about my keep and town and dockyards, you know. Lord Stark has promised me every help. Roz nodded at that and then they just lay there for a long moment, content in each other's company. And then eventually Roz broke the silence. So, who will be your Lady Greymist? One of the new girls from Essos. He laughed softly. Anyone I want. Would you like to be Lady Greymist? There was a moment of utter shocked silence and then she burst out laughing. Me? Give over, Theon. Don't be so daft. What a joke. It's not a joke. Honest. She half sat up. Theon, I'm a whore. You can't have a whore for a wife. You wouldn't be a whore. You'd be my wife. A lord's wife can't be a former whore. Why not? Because, a lord has standards, or something. People would talk. And now he laughed, bitterly. Roz, they'll always talk about me. I could live to be 100, build the best fleet in history, stand back to back on the wall with Robb Stark fighting against the others, have 100 children like Lord fucking Free, and yet I'll still always be that former squid to many in the north. How long did it take the Mandaelis before they were no longer known as that lot from the Reach? 500 years. 600. He shrugged. So, people will talk. Let them. I want to be happy. Don't you want to be? She gaped at him and then she lay back down next to him. You are truly daft, Theon. Life's never that easy. Life, she seemed to struggle with the words. Life isn't a song. It's harder and nastier than that. I know it's not a song. The others are coming for us all. That's not a song, that's a nightmare. I've seen them, I know what they're like. They're a nightmare like the one I had about my brothers and the drowned god. I broke out of that when I chose the old gods. And some people speak of lordships as being chained down by duties. But why not break out of that as well? I'm founding a new house, by my rules. Roz stared at him for a long moment, and there were tears in her eyes, tears that she wiped away with her hand. It's not possible, she said eventually. I'm just a whore. Don't you want to be more than that? How long did you even want to be in this life? This threw her for a moment. I want to be one of the lucky ones. Be careful, choose the right men, never get the pox, or never get turned ugly by the cure to the pox if I ever got it, own my own house. If I got that far. I like you. He licked his lips nervously. Like you a lot. And I know that you've got a soft spot for me, because you're always available for me. You have your letters and your numbers. Why not? Blushing a little, Roz once again stared at him. Theon, you are daft. What would Lord Stark say? I'd talk to him. What would your father say? Bugger him, Theon replied bitterly. I renounced his legacy when I changed my name, remember? There was a tense moment of silence and then he sighed and ran his hands through his hair. I'm headed for the Iron Islands with my sister in a few days. To Pike, to help Lord Stannis Baratheon broker a peace there. And when I am there I'll tell my father that I'm not his heir anymore. I'm Lord Greymist now, with my own direwolf. And there's nothing he can do or say to change my mind. I'm of the North now. He said the words with such a drive and intensity that she just stared at him, as if she was no longer sure who or what he was. You mean that, she said eventually. All of it. All of it, he replied. Every bit of it. And what I said earlier. I've chosen a new path. So can you. Something happened to her eyes at that point, something deep and emotional, like a fire appearing from the other side of a wall of ice. And then it vanished as she looked away and then stared at his crotch and his stiffening cock. You'd better come back alive from Pike, Theon Greymist. Because we need to talk. Now get your money's worth and fuck me again. Hard. Ned. The Reach. Cat said the words with deep dismay. Ned, that's at the other end of the Seven Kingdoms. You'd be away for months. And what's all this about a gate? He took her in his arms and held her close for a long moment, trying to calm her down. He failed, he could feel that by the tautness within her frame, but she did relax just a hair. I won't say I'll be gone and back before you know it, but I'll be away for less time than you think. Asher Greyjoy has promised me a fast ship and a crew that will get me to Old Town, sailing from Torrens Square. Cat looked at him uncertainly. Do you trust her? She's Ironborn. She needs our help. And the help of Robert. She will not let us down. She dare not. And her ship will get me there fast. She ordered it north and it should be there by now. I have to deal with Barbary Bloody Dustin and this fog in Barrowtown first, but then I'll be off down south for as little time as possible and then back again. I'll be back well before it's time for the baby to come, I swear it. She looked at him again and then hugged him. I'll hold you to your word, Ned Stark. You'd better come back. There's a war to be won at the wall, after all. He smiled and kissed her lips. I'll be back. Now. There's a lot to be done. Robert and many of the other lords leave for the wall to see the lay of the land in a few days. I leave tomorrow. It's important, Cat, this thing with this gate. Don't ask me why or how. I just know it's important. His wife sighed. I don't like it, Ned. Neither do I. But it's got to be done. I have a feeling about it. And so Cat sighed and nodded and left to make the arrangements. He had issued his own orders, but he had a feeling that they would be inadequate compared to what she could do. He was, merely, her husband. And that made him laugh a little. His feet took him through Winterfell afterwards, as the sun started to make its way down towards the horizon. He loved this place so much. The place that his ancestors had built. He sighed and then strode towards the Godswood. Perhaps he needed some guidance from the old gods. But then, before he reached it, he saw Robert. The king was sitting on the log he'd been using to train and was wiping his face with a piece of cloth. Judging from the sweat stains on his jerkin and the bucket of water at his feet, he'd been training. He was also staring at the nearby wall of Winterfell with a frown. So he went to join his friend. Are you well, Robert? He asked the question in a low voice. Robert started a little and then looked at him. Fine, Ned, just fine. Just sitting here and thinking. And looking at that wall. Dropped the log earlier on. It scraped some of the moss off the lowest course of stones. Are those runes carved there? He looked and then nodded. There are runes here and there on the stones. Never really thought much about it. Robert sighed a little. Storm's End has similar stones. First men work, or they knew things that we don't. But we have things that they did not. Robert chuckled slightly. Usually I'm trying to cheer you up, cause you're a doorbugger at times. But I am thinking that Bronze Yon's worries about the runes are right. We do need to know more. I was thinking about that. We should ask Lewin and Maester Eamon. They'll take it very seriously indeed. I think that there are runes on the wall as well. Robert nodded. I'll ask Eamon at the wall. Ned thought about how Robert would treat the old Targaryen, and something of that must have been visible on his face. But Robert placed a hand on his shoulder in reassurance. I'll treat the old man with all due respect, Ned. I know he's nothing like Aes or Rhaegar. He's a Targaryen to respect. Those are words that I never thought I'd say, but it's true. Ned nodded and then looked over his shoulder. Yes, they were truly alone. He knows about Jon, he whispered. And gave him advice. To do his duty to House Stark and stay alive. No ambitions, he said. No false sense of entitlement. No, Jon will do his duty and found a new house here in the north. Robert studied his face carefully and then nodded. And then he grinned. Is that red-haired wilderling lass going with him to Pike? You know that she has her eye on him, don't you? I know, Ned said with a sigh. Gods, he felt as if he needed to have eyes on the back of his head these days. Jon was dancing around with Ygritte, someone who expected certain things in a man. Ironically, he had a feeling that Robert would approve of a match with Ygritte. If the truth about him ever came out, then a wilderling wife would not be something that any Targaryen loyalist would find attractive. As for Robb and his yearning looks at Val, well, he needed to have a word with that boy. I still don't like the idea of him going to Pike. Balon Greyjoy is a fool. Stannis will be there. Not even Balon Greyjoy would be fool enough to go against the hand of the king. The Reader's men should be there as well. Ned nodded. I know. But there's something about this Iron Islands matter that puts my teeth on edge. I don't know what it is. It just bothers me. Robert nodded. I know, I feel it too. I've talked to Stannis. He'll be careful. You leave tomorrow with them. And you go to the wall after. Who's going with you? The Lannisters. The Valyman too. He paused. And Gendry too, I think. I want to see how he does on the wall. Might bring Maya too. I've been watching them both, quiet like. He's a good lad. Kind. Bloody good with a hammer. And she's good with horses. Got a hell of a mouth on her for those who cross her. He fell silent. I've been a shit father to them both. That said, I didn't even know about the lad until this year. Still, he deserves better than he's known. And my gods, they both look like me. Why didn't I see the truth about Joffrey and the others? You didn't expect Cersei to betray you in the way that she did. Ned shook his head. What's to become of her? A shrug was Robert's initial answer. I think that Tywin Lannister has sent a raven to Jon asking him if there was a handy and remote island off the Vale somewhere. Exile. Just her and a female servant. Might not even allow the servant. Let her rot. Ned sighed slightly. Good. He didn't want her blood on his hands. Joffrey goes to the wall before you. Oh yes, with Gia Mormont. Robert's eyes glittered. Do you know, there were times when I was beset with boring shit in the Red Keep, with 1,001 little things to bog me down, and I thought about tossing my crown on the table and telling them that I was abdicating and buggering off to Essos to found my own sellsword company. Do you know what stopped me? Two things. One was the thought of letting Jon down. The other was the fact that Joffrey would be king after me. And I knew that he'd be a shit king. Well. Robb's tale confirmed my worst fears. There was a long moment of silence and then Ned sighed and stood. Well, now. We both have a lot to do. Robert rumbled as he stood as well. I won't be trying to match your great ride south. I heard Raider singing that song of his about it earlier. Catchy. Ned could not help but to laugh a little. he's a talented fellow, for a king beyond the wall. They clasped forearms and then slapped each other's shoulders, before breaking apart and walking off in different directions, he to talk to Lewin and Robert to hopefully change that sweaty and stinking shirt. But it was Tywin Lannister who waylaid him first. The Lord of Casterly Rock strode towards him with his brother Kevan behind him. "Lord Stark, I would like a word if you please." The green eyes that swept over him were intent, but not worryingly so. "Of course, Lord Lannister," he replied. "Is this a matter that requires my solar?" A nod. "Perhaps so." Frostfira was waiting for him in his solar, and as he sat in his chair she padded next to him and then sat by his side, her eyes on Tywin Lannister, who hesitated for a heartbeat and then sat himself, with his brother sitting behind him. Jory Castle, who was a constant presence, closed the door at his nod and then stood there as a doorwarden. "I would like to discuss the immediate marriage of my son Tyrion to your cousin Daisy Shuristone," Tywin Lannister began. "You leave for the Reach tomorrow, I leave the Wall with His Grace the King not long after that. They are both of an age to marry, they seem to be fond of each other, and above all it will forge a link between our two houses and the North and the Westerlands that will be important." Ned blinked slightly. Bloody hell, was Daisy a mind-reader? And then he nodded. I agree. Given the short notice it will not be particularly extravagant, but I agree." He looked to one side and then pulled out a sheath of papers. "Daisy has already made some plans for it." Tywin Lannister's right eyebrow twitched upwards. "She has?" He handed the papers over. "Oh yes. She is a Shuristone to her bones." The Lord of Casterly Rock looked through the papers quickly and then for a fraction of a second smiled. It was gone in an instant, and then he passed the papers on to his brother, who took and read them with a frown. "Her father would be proud." "Ah. Her father." Ned nodded somberly. "He is much missed." After a moment of silence Tywin cleared his throat. "You should be aware that Tyrion is my official heir now. Ravens announcing that have gone back to Casterly Rock." He pulled a slight face. "You should also know that despite some rumors about his height, he is more than capable of fathering children. He has had a reputation as someone who enjoys the company of certain women, and he has always had a supply of moon tea on him. On the occasions when certain women have not taken that concoction, I have always made sure that they were made to if they showed signs of pregnancy." He looked at the man who would soon be his cousin by marriage. "Thank you," he said eventually. "I know that Daisy wants to make sure that there are Shuristones after her." "Which brings me to my other point," Tywin Lannister said. "The issue of inheritance. I know that there is a saying in the North that there must always be a Shuristone in Shuristone. As Tyrion is my heir, he is also responsible for making sure that there are Lannisters in Casterly Rock. I therefore propose the following, that their firstborn be a Lannister of Casterly Rock, but that their secondborn be a Shuristone of Shuristone." "That is also agreeable to me," Ned said, before looking at Kevan Lannister. The 10th page. Towards the bottom. The older man frowned at him, shuffled through the pages and then he stopped. His eyebrows went up and then he passed the page to his brother whilst winking at Ned. Tywin Lannister read the proffered page and then he laughed for a moment. "Clever girl. Yes, her father would be proud. We are agreed then." "We are agreed." He held out his hand. And Tywin Lannister took it. Old Griff. It was late. He was late. The man who called himself Old Griff carefully positioned the brazier on the deck of the ship. You had to be careful with fire on a ship. Too much tar, too much canvas and rope that might catch light. He looked at the flames and then sculled, before suppressing a yawn. It had been a long day. He glowered at the flames. Too much had gone wrong these past months. Mapatis dying had been bad, although he hadn't warned him that much. The Magister had only been interested in their enterprise because he thought that he could introduce slavery to Westeros and profit from it. Hey. No, he wouldn't have profited a single bronze coin from it if they had succeeded when the man was still alive. Not after being stuck full of arrows. Him and his unsullied guards. He heard the distinctive sound of boots on the gangplank that led to the shore and he placed a hand on his sword and looked at the entranceway. After a moment a cloaked and hooded figure came into view. As it reached the deck of the ship it looked about, spotted him and then hands came up to pull the hood down. Ah. Varies. The cockless wonder. You're late, he grated as the eunuch sat down opposite him and warmed his hands by the brazier. I expected you hours ago. My apologies, Varys muttered. However, you did choose a quite isolated anchorage, shall we say. The next boat is almost half a mile away. I've found that caution is better than boldness these days. Wise words, Varys simpered, and he looked at him. There were times when he didn't trust anyone, and those times seemed especially heightened when he was around the master of ships of Westeros. He looked back at the brazier. We can talk freely here. The crew's buggered off to the nearest whorehouse and the boy is asleep. Varys looked about. Where is he? He jerked his chin at the forward cabin. Over there. He was tired. Good, then we can indeed speak freely. About many things. Oh yes. The Martells have gone silent on us. No letters, no promise of gold, nothing. Ah. Varys nodded as if he knew something that he did not. I expected that. You did. Indeed. The call has made them cautious. Fuck. The call. The fucking call. I don't see why some bloody northern superstition should have affected so many people. Varys tilted his head to one side, like a bird peering down at something it didn't understand. Well, it's both simple and hard to explain. He waved a hand in utter denial. No, enough. The Martells have cold feet. Fuck them. Yes, fuck them. He would have his revenge, despite them. At least we have the gold that Mapatis left you. Varys tilted his head the other way. Ah, that. Yes, he did leave me gold. But not in the quantities we might have wished. He opened his mouth, closed it again as he stuffed his temper back into the black hole where it seemed to spring from so easily these days, and then said a single word, what? The eunuch sighed. Yes, he did indeed leave me a substantial amount of gold. But he also left a legacy to his illegitimate children, who were rather more plentiful than I might have imagined. I shall be looking into some of them, just to be on the safe side. Oh, and apparently rather more money was left to the Magisters of Pentos than I had been led to believe. Most peculiar. I have already asked about the truth of that with the Iron Bank, where his gold was deposited. I imagine that his last will and testament will be examined rather more closely than some would have hoped. He repressed a snarl of fury. Fools. We should deal with them later. Well, that should be enough to at least give the Golden Company a taste of what they need. We can make other arrangements and, what? Varys was staring at him as he didn't believe what he had just heard. Your anchorage is remote indeed. You seem to be somewhat behind the latest news. What news? Well, firstly, the Golden Company is no more. It has broken up. This was so unexpected that he stopped in mid-yawn. What? Impossible. All too possible, I'm afraid, Varys said with a shake of his bald head. They have split into 3 parts. One is off to Volantis, I believe, to take up a contract. That part is mostly made up of the more Isozi of them. Another part is trying to get home to Westeros, in answer to the call. And the third seems to be drifting, irresolute and generally clueless as to what to do. The call. He hissed the word as if it pained his lips, which it virtually did. The fucking call. Mummery and lies. Stark's lies at that. Tales of northern ghosts and snooks and grumpkins. I fear not. Varys spoke the words in a hard voice and he looked at him in surprise. The call is true. I have seen the head of a white. The men of the Night's Watch have been bringing them south in cages from the wall. Cages that somehow stop them from rotting. I thought them nothing more than a trick at first, a mechanism from MYR. But no, they are real. They exist. And if whites are real, then the others must be too. He tilted his head to one side. Did you hear it? The call. Sweat prickled his brow for a moment. He had heard it in his sleep. He still heard it in his dreams. House Connington went back a long way. How long? There were times when he didn't want to know. And he wanted to go home. To Griffin's Roost. He was needed there, he knew it. But, not yet. His revenge came first. Mummery, he snarled. Northern nonsense. Varys sat there, his head still tilted. Ah. He said softly after a while. So you did hear it. I see it in your face. There was a pause and then he seemed to shrug. The second thing is that Braavos has seized Pentos. Again. What? For what reason? When Illyrio died he took a lot of the common sense of the Magisters with them. They spent a lot of time boasting about what they were going to do with Daenerys Targaryen's dragons. Such as burning Braavos to the ground. He blinked. Her dragons are real. Not just a tale. Oh, very real. I've seen them. 3 dragons, the firstborn in more than 100 years. And now Braavos has them. Them and the girl. Well, I know the city well. They might be, let's say, rescued. Varys had an odd look on his face. Rescued. Oh, the Braavosi don't have them. They vanished from Pentos during the attack. Almost mysterious. He just looked at the cockless wonder. Mysterious. Really? You have them, he said flatly. Where have you stuck them? Another yawn ripped its way out of him and he cursed the hour. The moon had risen. Me. Varys simpered. You have great faith in my abilities. I know you, he said flatly. Where is she? Safe. Varys said the word just as flatly. There was a long moment of silence as they stared at each other and then he threw his hands up. Very well, have your secrets. He leant back, his mind working. Well, this is a stroke of luck. We can marry the girl to the boy. How large are the dragons? Another yawn. Very small, Varys replied. Am I boring you? It's been a long day. How long before they can be ridden? I am no expert on dragons, but I imagine that it would be years. I see your plan, but there is a problem. You think that 3 dragons and 2 dragon riders would be a standard around which you could recruit all kinds of people. There's just one problem. The boy can't ride one of the dragons. And we both know why. He looked at the eunuch and then quickly at the forward cabin. Keep your voice down, you fool. Why? We both know the truth about the boy. He's not a Targaryen. Be silent. He almost roared the words, but then a wave of weakness washed over him. Gods! This was more than tiredness. Was he ill? He looked down at his hands, which were trembling. Ah! Varys said the word with something odd in his voice. Are you all right? Just tired. He squinted at the other man. He was so tired. It takes a while for it to reach full effect, depending on how large a person is. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up on end. What does? Varys smiled sadly. I was not as late as you thought I was. I was here earlier. I was the cook who served the stew. I added some seasoning for you and the boy. A merciful poison, if such a thing can be described as that. Based on slumberberries, or whatever the name is here. Concentrated, of course. You go to sleep, I am told, and then every breath you take after that is shallower and shallower, until you die. He gripped the handle of the dagger and tried to rise, but his legs betrayed him in an instant and he sprawled on the deck, the dagger slipping from his hand. Varys swept it up in an instant, moving like a cat and then standing over him. And then the full weight of the eunuch's words swept over him. No. He looked at the cabin. I'm sorry, Varys said regretfully. The boy's been dead for at least an hour now. He felt its effects first. Slowly, fumblingly, he scrabbled his way across the deck towards the cabin, getting weaker and more tired with every yard. It took an endless moment of fumbling to open the cabin door and then he saw the motionless figure in the bunk. He somehow dragged his way to the bunk and then with trembling fingers felt for a pulse. There was none. He slumped down by the bunk, his mind moving oh so slowly. Despair clouded everything, along with such weariness. He heard the footsteps and looked to one side. Varys was there with a lantern. Why? Baratheon's Master of Whispers seemed to sigh a little. Because the plan has gone to pieces and the Game of Thrones is in abeyance. Because your plan would never work, not now. Because the last thing that Aerys Targaryen did was to order his hand, the pyromancer Rossart, to ignite the wildfire caches that had been secreted beneath the city. Because the Targaryens cannot rule Westeros, not just now, not while people remember such madness. We need a new plan. And you, with your need for revenge, would never agree to a more long-term plan. You would object, or get in the way, or just be yourself. I had to remove you from the board, as it were. So. Goodbye, John Connington. Fare you well. And again. I'm sorry. He glared at the wretched cockless wonder, wanting to spring to his feet and strangle the bastard, but he was tired. So tired. So very tired. His eyelids fluttered and then closed. Tired. Tyrion. Books about the Hightower tended to be, well, bulky in some places and thin in others. There was a lot about the raids by the Ironborn and quite a bit about the Andal invasion and even more about the Gardener Kings and their terrible fate at the Field of Fire. But when it came to the founding of the Hightower itself, well, not a lot. He peered down at the book and then mentally made a note to try and send a raven to Casterly Rock about the Hightower. Surely something had to be in the archives. He thought about what the Citadel might have in its archives and pulled a slight face. Something nagged at him every time he thought about the Citadel these days. He wondered just what the Maestas might have buried in those priceless and oh so inaccessible book stacks of theirs. Boots sounded on the floorboards to one side and he looked up to see the door open as father entered the room. To anyone who did not know Tywin Lannister, he was his stone-faced usual self. To those who knew him as well as Tyrion did, he was in a slightly amused and yet slightly bemused mood. You just had to learn how to read the lines around his eyes. Is something the matter, father? Father sat down and directed a slightly glowering look at him. You, he said quietly, are marrying a rather remarkable young woman. As I have said before, treat her right, or there will be a long list of people who will be more than willing to chastise you. He thought of Roose Bolton, Great John Umber and above all Ned Stark, and repressed a shudder. Oh, he replied quietly, I am very much aware of that fact. Can I ask why you are mentioning this now? His father made no reply other than to hand over a sheaf of papers. Bemused himself now, he looked at them. And then he noticed that the handwriting was Dace's. Ah. He riffled through a few pages. The word progeny left off the page and he felt sweat bead his brow. Ah, he said, a most inadequate word for what he was reading. And then again, ah. Yes, Lady Sherestone has laid out the various options in terms of your children and their titles. Your firstborn son will be Lord of the Westerlands after you. Your firstborn child will also be the Lord or Lady of Sherestone. Therefore, should you have 2 children, then the titles will depend on the sex of the children, and should there be more than 2, well, provision has been made for all eventualities. A clever and imaginative girl, no, woman. She will be a great asset for you, at your side. As Tyrion stared down at the papers, father stood. You are researching the Hightower, I see. More than slightly thrown, Tyrion looked at the books. Yes. I was trying to find more information for Ned Stark when he leaves tomorrow. His forthcoming departure has caused a great deal of discussion about many things. He wishes to be present at the wedding of his cousin, obviously. As he leaves tomorrow, and will be gone for possibly many weeks, if not months, that means that you will marry Daisy Sherestone tonight. His brain seemed to stop working for a long moment. When he spoke again, he made sure that it was not in a squeak. Tonight. Tonight. You are not accompanying the king and I to the wall, as you know. I suggest you use the coming days to make your bride exceedingly happy. The words "get the girl with child" hung unsaid over the conversation. Ah. Father was actually trying to be pleasant. He wasn't sure if he could get used to this. I'm delighted, but surely this is a bit short notice in terms of clothes and so forth. I mean, I don't want Daisy to complain about. Save your breath. She has already had a cloak created by the Starks. The ceremony will happen in the Godswood. You can assuage Westerland's sensibilities later with a confirmatory marriage in the September, or even do both again at Casterly Rock. More shock. Then delight. And then a vague feeling of worry. He was going to marry Daisy. Right now. He did not want to disappoint her. She'd see him naked for the first time. There would be, well, sex. What if he was not what she had in mind? What if he stopped asking stupid questions? He loved her. She had made it very clear that she loved him. They were going to be married. And so the next few hours were spent in a whirlwind of preparations. Father had had some fine clothes made in his exact size, along with a fine belt for the warnings to sit in. Rocktooth would be a bit much, but it was important to show Lannister heirlooms that had been made by the first men. As he stood in front of the heart tree in the middle of Winterfell's Weirwood, he made himself calm down a bit, as his heart was hammering at his ribs. This was happening, it was actually happening. Ned Stark, resplendent in his fur-trimmed cloak, Frostfyre at his side, stepped in front of him and directed a look at him that was part welcoming, part reassuring and part terrifying, before he cleared his throat. Who comes before the old gods on this night? He looked back to see that Daisy had arrived, escorted by Robb Stark. She looked beautiful. Robb cleared his throat slightly and then intoned, "Daisy, of the House Shuristone, comes here to be wed. A woman grown, true-born and noble. She comes to beg the blessing of the gods. Who comes to claim her? Tyrion, of the House Lannister, heir to Casterly Rock. Who gives her? Robert, of the House Stark, cousin to Daisy." He seemed to be an observer to the rest of the ceremony, almost watching as some presence controlled his body and gave the correct responses. He could see the king standing off to one side, a hulking figure who said not a word. Uncles Geryon and Kevan were off to the other, both grinning, whilst the Starks seemed to combine smiles with glowers. But his eyes were on Daisy. Just Daisy. Her smile and her eyes were a little nervous but also promised him everything. Oh, he was going to have to be at his best tonight. Domeric. Sansa had sewn him a new patch with their concept for the new banner of House Bolton on it, and he looked at it with deep approval. Yes. Close enough to the old one to reassure, but different enough to matter. It had been a fine line to thread, literally, but they, or rather Sansa, had done it. He looked at the south gate and sighed. He felt as if he should be going with Lord Stark. He felt as if he had been doing next to nothing for weeks now. The future of the North, no, the future of Westeros itself, was at stake. And he was sitting in Winterfell, doing next to nothing. Now, Father had made it very clear that he was to do nothing. Until he married Sansa and they had children, he was the last direct heir to the Westerosi branch of House Bolton. Yes, there were cousins here and there, but they did not bear the name of Bolton. And yes, there were the Boltons who had served with the Company of the Rose, but they had been abroad in Essos for centuries and were therefore according to Father not quite right. He had a sneaking suspicion about what was not right about them. They had abandoned certain traditions that he suspected that Father wanted to keep open as options. And that was the gentlest possible way that he could describe such things. No. Never again. He and Sansa would never allow it ever happening again, and their children would be brought up to be more like them than Father. He thought about Ramsay, the brother he had never met, again, and he shuddered. Oh, from what he had heard about Ramsay, he would have embraced the old days with a vengeance. Your little bird not here then? He started a little with surprise at the voice, before looking about. Ah. Sandor Clegane. The man with the horrific burns to his face was standing to one side, clutching a mug of ale and looking his usual bitter and sardonic self. Little bird? Domeric asked. Do you mean Sansa? I. The little fluttering one. Do my looks make her feel uneasy? He looked at the scars on the man's face, or what he could see of them through the curtain of hair that he left hang over it. He said eventually. Can you blame her? Clegane snorted and then shrugged. Oh, you're smitten with her. You're from the family that flays, aren't you? He knew that the man was trying to bait him and he just tilted his head to one side in response, drawing on the lessons that Lord Redfort had taught him. No longer. He was proud of the way that he said the words flat and firm. Clegane looked at him, his eyes filled with something that he couldn't quite describe, and then he drank some of his ale and shrugged. You sound very sure of yourself, sir. Clegane said the title as if it disgusted him. I am very certain. I have sworn an oath upon it. On the fist of winter no less. He looked coolly back at the tall man. You do not seem to like titles like sir, do you? Clegane bared his teeth at him in something that was not quite smile and not quite snarl. The man who did this to me, he pointed at his scars, was later seen to be fit to be made a knight. He stared at the man and barely knew what to say. Fortunately someone else did. Leave the boy alone, Clegane. Rather aggrieved to be called a boy, he turned to meet this newcomer, and then he stopped and blanched a little. The Green Man. The man whose very presence gave him goosebumps, for reasons that he could not explain. You again, Clegane grunted, before swilling more ale, some of which dribbled out of the hole in his cheek. What the fuck do you want, old man? He bristled at that. Could the wretched man not at least moderate his language a bit? He was no knight, and seemed to despise those with that title, but surely he could show some respect. But before he could say anything, the Green Man walked past him, laying a hand on his shoulder briefly as he passed. The older man then just stood there and stared at Clegane, as if sizing him up before shaking his head a little and sighing. What? Clegane grunted sourly. What do you want? I keep seeing you staring at me every now and then. The old gods have a strange sense of humor at times. Both he and Clegane frowned at this. What did he mean? And then Clegane spat to one side. Fuck your old gods. And the new gods. And fuck you. Domeric was about to remonstrate with him when the Green Man did something unexpected. He laughed. Ah, Clegane, do you think that you intimidate me at all? The things I've seen would freeze you to the marrow bone. I've met people who would make you piss yourself with terror. And I've been through things that would have you crying like a girl. You think that your face is bad? He held up his hand and unrolled his sleeve to reveal the burns on it. This was from wildfire, boy. And you want to know why I have been watching you? For this moment. Now. There was another moment of confusion, and then the Green Man's arm lashed out and grabbed Sander Clegane's unburned ear, as he would a small and errant child. Clegane howled with pain and rage, and then the Green Man turned and strode off, pulling Clegane as he went. Domeric gaped at it all, confused beyond words. What was happening? You too, Bolton, the old man called over his shoulder. Come along. We need a witness for this. So he followed them both as the Green Man strode along to the Godswood of Winterfell. Let go of my fucking ear, you old cunt. Clegane roared as he tried to regain his balance, but the Green Man seemed to keep veering his arm around just enough to frustrate him. Domeric trotted after them, a fascinated and both amused and baffled spectator. You need a lesson in manners, young Clegane, the Green Man said as they approached the heart tree. And a lesson of a different sort. You don't believe in the old gods, do you? Fuck you. Let go. How are you doing this? The Green Man pulled Clegane up to the heart tree and let go, and then he put one hand on the tree and the other around Clegane's neck. The hound clutched at the hand and then he froze. So did Domeric. There was red fire burning in the eyes of the Green Man. He'd seen that fire before. The old gods were here. You don't believe in the old gods, do you, Clegane? The hound made a noise of inarticulate terror. Well, they are here now. And seems that you need a lesson in balance. That's what the old gods preach. The scales of life, as it were. You were burned once by your brother. I was burned too. And now I know why. It's time to level the scales. And with that he removed his hand from Clegane's neck and placed it on the burned part of his face. Clegane roared with pain, and then light seemed to shine from the Green Man's hand, light that suffused the hound's face. The big man froze. The light brightened, from a glow to a blaze, and Clegane whimpered with what was either pain or sheer terror. Brighter and brighter went the light, and Domeric could hear people shouting outside the Godswood, asking what was going on, and then it faded. The Green Man sagged against the heart tree, his chest rising and falling as he panted. As for Clegane, well, he fell to the ground like a wet sack of meal. For a long moment Domeric thought that he was dead, and he stirred and tried to push himself up. What the fuck was that? Clegane slurred the words out. Look in the pool. And so Sander Clegane looked into the pool in the Godswood and saw that his burns had gone, replaced with pink unscarred skin. And he wept. Robb. Father was already in his riding gear when he arrived in his solar, with Frost Fear asleep by the fire. He did his best not to sigh as he started to list all of the things that he needed to keep an eye on, ranging from making sure that mother did not fret too much in her condition to ensuring that the former queen was kept well guarded until she could be moved to whatever her final fate would be. He wondered what that fate would be. And in the meantime there was the constant need to look to the wall to support the night's watch. He sighed a little and then smiled slightly when father sent a questioning look his way. I thought that life was complicated enough in that other time, when I was as war. But this will be harder in a way. There's so much to do. You'll be fine, Robb. You've been the Stark in Winterfell before in this time, which is what people will think of. Use your other experiences well. And listen to the others when you have to. He looked at father and nodded. I wish I was going with you. To Barrowtown at least. Now it was father's turn to sigh. He reached out and placed a consoling hand on his shoulder. I know, Robb. And I know that you have memories of some very dark days after I left Winterfell in that other time. But I know that you can do it. Thank you, father. He looked back at him. And final words of wisdom until you return. Lady Dustin is a contrary creature, so if I need help I will send for it. I hope that I do not, though not with the fist of winter with me. He frowned. She sent me very little help when I called the banners in that other time. You know her better than I do though. Father said with a slight grimace. Oh, and keep thinking about marriage alliances. Lord Westerling is here, but not his daughter. Have you been thinking of her? I have, he muttered. But as you said, she is not here and things are different now. I've seen you talking with Mance Rayder's good sister, Val, a lot. Robb, I know that your mother and I want you to be happy, so we have not pressed a match on you. But you must think very carefully on this matter. He thought about Val and then realized that he was blushing slightly. Father, I don't know. I have not decided on anything right now. I like Val a lot, but I know that there would be problems with some of the lords of the north if I married a wildling, even if we are now allied with them. I know that alliance is new and that people have long memories of bitter enmities with them. He paused. I need to balance my heart and my head. There was a pause and then father nodded. A second long night is coming, he said quietly. We don't know how long it will last. We don't know how many will die in this war that is to come. We don't know how many things, traditions and other things will have to be torn up as we do our best to survive. As you said, balance your heart and your head. House Stark must survive. The moment of silence that followed was a long one, and then it was broken as Frostfyre awoke with a start and then a fist pounded against the closed door. Father turned with a frown. Come. The door opened to reveal Jory and Domeric. Both were pale. My lord, the Bolton heir almost stammered, something has happened that you must know of at once. The Green Man has healed Sandor Clegane of his burns in the Godswood. He placed his hand on the burns and his eyes burned with red fire and then light came from his hand. The burns were healed. I witnessed it myself. And I saw the light from the Godswood myself, my lord, Jory added. Quite a few people witnessed that light. He exchanged a startled look with father and then they both strode out, followed by Frostfyre. They found Sandor Clegane sitting on a bench that a white-faced guard had obviously pulled out for him. The smaller of the two Cleganes was pale, his eyes wide and stunned, and his hands shook as if he had had a palsy. And his face was indeed healed. Robb stood there, just stared at the pink skin on Clegane's face, stunned. And then after a moment he shook himself mentally. If the old gods had brought him back in time from his death, why should he be so surprised at the Green Man healing Clegane? Clegane himself was too stunned himself to speak, and when Jory thrust a mug of ale at him he had to grip the container with both hands in order to still his shaking hands and then lift it to his lips and quaff vigorously. As for the Green Man himself, he was leaning against a nearby tree, looking a bit pale but quite pleased with himself. When he saw that he and father were looking at him he smiled slightly. It needed to be done, he said enigmatically. Clegane needed to understand. And with that he strode off. The hour that followed was a long one. He and father had to order Clegane back to his room and tell the servants and guards to not follow and stare at him. Which many did anyway. Various others came up to ask what in the hells was going on, including the king and his brother. But after that Winterfell seemed to settle down a bit and everything seemed to rush towards the departure of the joint party to the south. He saw Theon first, his direwolf at his side. "Are you sure that you don't want to leave Mist here?" Theon shook his head and then grinned cockily at him. "A direwolf at my side should convince my father that I'm a Northman now. What if your father disagrees, or hurts Mist?" Theon's smile vanished. "If he touches Mistile, well, he'd be sorry. Besides, Jon is taking Ghost with him." Which was true, and Jon appeared next, his own direwolf at his side, carrying his saddlebags. "Clegane's getting drunk in the Great Hall," he said as he started to saddle his horse. "Sandor Clegane, that is. Oh, and his brother went to see him. Those two hate each other." Theon frowned as he saddled his own horse. "What happened?" Jon shrugged. The mountain just stared at the hound as if he'd seen a ghost and then wandered off, his shadows following him. They looked worried. "Is the man mad?" There was an awkward silence and then Robb shrugged as well. "He's the mountain. He's a not man, he's a weapon." And then there was the sound of boots to one side and Ygritte strode in, carrying her own saddlebags. She was wearing riding leathers that fitted her rather well, had a plain sword at her hip and had her unstrung bow and quiver slung over one shoulder. As she saddled a horse she glanced over at them. "What are you looking at? What are you doing?" Jon asked the question with strain in his voice. "This is a horse," Ygritte replied, as if talking to a small child. "Some call them horses. And this is a saddle. The saddle goes on the horse. I'll then ride the horse. Is that clear enough, or is that all too complex for you, Jon Stark?" Theon and Robb swapped a glance and then both suppressed a snicker. Jon flushed. "You are not coming with me." "Yes, I am." "I forbid it." "You forbid it, do you? And who are you to me to forbid things?" This was a question that left Jon spluttering with baffled rage, and she smirked at him. "You know nothing, Jon Stark. Now that that's settled, get used to it. I'm coming with you to Pike." This was enough to make Jon throw his hands in the air with frustration, before finally, after a long moment of glowering at Ygritte, returning to the job of saddling his horse. As Robb and the three riders walked into the main courtyard there was a frenzy of activity. Father was hugging Mother, who looked teary-eyed, whilst Sansa, Domeric, Arya, Bran and Rickon watched, their faces showing different emotions. "I'll be back in time to see the babe born," he heard Father tell Mother, before kissing her gently and then hugging her again. And with that he hugged the remaining children, shook Domeric by the hand and then turned to face Robb. "You will be the Stark in Winterfell when I am away, Robb," he said loudly. "Lead the North in my absence. The long night comes again and with it war against the others." "I will not let you down, Father," he said with a formal nod, before stepping into his father's embrace. "Come back this time, I beg of you," he whispered in Father's ear. "I don't want it to be like the last time I remember you leaving." "I'll be back," Father whispered in reply. "Count on it." And then they stepped away from each other. "Good luck in the south, Lord Stark," the king boomed to one side, before sweeping Father up in a fearsome and possibly rib-cracking hug of his own. "Let Lord Tyrell know that what you do there is with my full support." The king smiled. "Good luck, Ned. You have a long journey ahead of you. I will help Robb to protect the North in your absence. You have my word on it." A final trio of people emerged to one side and Robb turned to see Stannis Baratheon emerge with his wife and daughter. He did not hug his wife, but he placed a hand on her cheek and smiled at her for almost 3 heartbeats. "Be safe here, wife," he rumbled. "Listen to the Maester in all things about the babe. You will always be in my thoughts." It was typical of the man, and Slyss Baratheon nodded choppily. "Do your duty and come back to us," she said quietly, and there was something in her voice that seemed to move the hand of the king. Stannis squatted down to face Shireen, who looked at him worriedly. "Look after your mother," he said with a kind look. "And take care of the terrible threesome." And then he hugged her gently and seemed to mutter something in her ear that made her throw her arms around his neck. When she released him she was red-eyed. "Mount!" Father roared, and there was a general movement in the courtyard and men and women stuck feet into stirrups and then pulled themselves up into saddles. Father watched it all, standing up in the stirrups once or twice and then looked down at Frostfyre, who was watching him. Jon and Theon had their own direwolves on their saddles, as they had on the Great Ride South. There was a long moment and then father raised a fist in the air and pumped it once. Ride. The twin parties turned to the south gate and then started to trot out, slowly at first due to the congestion at the gate. The banners of houses Stark and Baratheon started to snap in the wind as the men holding them released the leading edges. Out they went, a cavalcade of leather and steel on horseback, until eventually the courtyard was empty and the work of shoveling up the horse shit could start. Mother stood at the gateway for a long time before seeming to sigh and walk off, but it was Robb who ran up the spiral stairs of the tallest guard tower to watch the column ride off to the south. Smaller and smaller the dots became, until the rear guard rounded a corner and descended a little and were lost to sight. It was only then that he realized that the king was standing next to him. Robert Baratheon just looked at him. "Are you all right, lad?" Robb stared south at where father's column had disappeared, before looking around carefully. "Your Grace, my last memory of my father from that other time, is when he went south with you, to be your hand. And I never saw him again." The king sighed and patted him on the back. "That was then. This is now. Come on. Joffrey Hill is off to the wall in a bit. You can tell him to bugger off and never show his face again in Winterfell." Which was of some small comfort. Jaime. When the booming thuds that were reverberating around the passageways of Casterly Rock ceased, he did not merely speed up, he ran. He did not care what the men thought, he just knew that something must have happened at the Lion's Mouth. He had no idea what, he just knew it. He was right. As he approached the second gate, a flood of blooded and visibly terrified men ran past him. "Hold," he cried in as loud a voice as he could still muster after so many days of shouting. "Where is Sir Adam? I mean Lord Marbrand." "Here, Sir Jaime." Adam looked every bit as bad as the rest of the men, blooded and limping. His sword was broken and there was what looked like the remains of fingernails stuck in his shield, as if that was even possible. "The Lion's Mouth is lost. The gates have gone. We must close the second gates at once." Jaime paled, but roared out the orders and watched as the gates closed. In the darkness beyond them, in the great cavern that was the Lion's Mouth, he could see shapes moving in the near distance, with other, fat taller, shapes coming closer. As the gates slammed shut, men ran to get timbers to brace them. "Adam, what happened?" Jaime hissed at his old friend. He could not believe that the gates of the Lion's Mouth were gone. They had been old but well maintained, a visible sign of the pride and wealth of House Lannister. "White giants holding tree trunks happened to them," Adam said as he threw his broken sword away and then gestured at his pale-faced squire, some cousin of his, to get him his other sword. The gates didn't last long. He thought about the booming that he had heard and then sighed. So that had been it. What about Tyrion's dragonglass arrows and the oil? They worked damned well. Right up until the moment that we ran out of them both. There had been 10 of the giants. We destroyed 8 of them, but the last 2, he shook his head. The gates never stood a chance. Jaime sighed and then looked about. "How many men did you lose?" "Too many," Adam replied grimly. "And those that killed them must have been on the field of ice." This time he winced. Well, at least Adam hadn't called it what others were whispering, Tywin's folly. That said, the latter was the more apt one. Father's decision to fight the forces of the undead had been more than folly, it had been a disaster. 50,000 Westerlanders had faced a horde of who knew how many whites, led by those terrible creatures from legend, the others. An hour later less than 2,000 living men were running or riding for their lives. All because father had not listened. All because father had made the army act as if it had been facing living foes, not the undead. He had all but sneered at the tales told by the fleeing Riverlanders. If only he knew, they, Uncle Kevan and himself as well, had been doubtful of the messages from the wall and Winterfell had listened to Tyrion. But now it was too late. "The second gate is still partly in the cave," he told Adam grimly. "So what they did to the Lion's Mouth they'll be able to do to that as well with their white giants. Fall back to the third gate. Barricade that as much as you can." Adam looked at him and then nodded. After a moment he straightened slightly. "Honor to serve, Sir Jaime." He placed his hand on the shoulder of his friend. "No, the honor has been mine, Lord Marbrand." Adam's face twisted just a bit at the reminder that his father was dead, and then he turned and snapped out orders to the men. And then just as they started to move away from the gates, they shuddered as from a mighty impact. Back! Jamie roared. Back to the third gate. They ran and, wonder of wonders, made it back to the gate before the second gate failed before the assault. Jamie left a dam as he had the men brace the third gate with everything they could get their hands on. That should hold. The passageway between the gates was about 10 feet tall, too small for a giant, or so he hoped. Whites, he was no expert on whites. As he pattered and then trudged as the exhaustion started to take its toll up the long spiral that headed upwards, he cudgeled his tired mind into action. They had few options now. They had to flee south. But the tunnels that led their way southeast were few and narrow, and the full garrison would be too many for them. Hey! Not that the full garrison was left, after the field of ice. What a name! The same result as on the field of fire. He set his jaw. Well, if father still thought that he knew better than everyone else, he had another thing coming. The wound he'd taken had shown him that, a blow from a panicking soldier who hadn't cared who he was trying to run over. As he reached the corridor where he had been aiming for, he saw Tyrion trotting towards him. His brother was holding a crossbow in one hand and was grim-faced. I can see from the balcony of father's quarters that the whites are streaming into the rock. The lion's mouth is taken then. It is. White giants with tree trunks. Adam said that they killed most of them, but the 2 that remained were enough to do the job. Then we have to flee. Agreed, Jamie said tersely as they walked up the corridor. We need supplies though. To his surprise, Tyrion smiled. Already done. I sent a party of guards with donkeys, laden with supplies, out of the southeastern tunnels this morning. Just in case. He smiled at his ugly little brother. Good. You will lead them, Tyrion. I will stay back to buy you time. Tyrion's smile vanished. Jamie. No arguments on this, little brother. If we had listened to you earlier, well, it's all too late now. Go to the tunnels. I'll send the others on. Father won't go. And Cersei? How is she? Worse than she was. Be careful. He nodded and then strode off towards father's quarters, which was being guarded by an exhausted-looking hound. As he approached, he could hear the voice of his twin. She seemed to be issuing orders. He slipped into the room and discovered that Cersei was indeed ranting at a young maester who he did not recognize. To one side stood father, leaning on a chair and looking out of the window panes that looked out onto the balcony. He was white-faced and breathing heavily, doubtless from his cracked ribs. As for Joffrey, well, the boy was a mute witness from the table he was sitting at. He too was pale. His first battle had been an utter rout, and his reaction to that rout had been to withdraw to a place within himself. Jamie, Cersei said after she finally noticed him. Where the 7 hells have you been? The maester slipped past him, his eyes mournful, and as he did he slipped Jamie a piece of paper. He looked down at it. Ah! A raven had come from Winterfell. Apparently Winterfell still stood, and Lord Stark bore the fist again. He shrugged internally. Madness. Not that any of that mattered. At the gates. The lion's mouth has fallen. The second gate too. I left Lord Marbrand working to brace the third gate. Cersei stared at him, and he could tell from her eyes that she did not believe a word he was saying. Impossible, she finally said. Marbrand is lying. Strip him of his lands and title, father. Not impossible, I was there, he pointed out through gritted teeth. Cersei's reaction to recent events had been to deny everything. He had to admit that Tyrion's conclusion was the right one. She was mad. The men have fallen back to the third gate. The others and their whites are in the rock. This seemed to enrage Cersei. Then lead a charge and throw them out. What with? Only dragon glass, fire and Valyrian steel affect them. Tyrion was right about the dragon glass. It kills them. How can that disgusting little monster be right about anything? How can rock be better than steel? I don't know, but it works. Then find some and use it. Do I look like a miner? Enough. It was father who spoke. He looked as if he was clinging on to his temper by the merest hair. Cersei, you are overwrought. He swallowed and then closed his eyes. We have lost. The rock is falling. We must leave. This only enraged Circe even more. The rock has never fallen to an enemy. It is not falling. Am I the only one of you with any balls? Circe, you are the only one of us with no brains, father snapped, his eyes flickering to Joffrey as if he was about to add a qualification. The lion's mouth is lost. The gates are falling one by one. Soon there will be only one way to fall back to upwards. And once we reach the top, where will we go to then? Fly. He seemed to slump a little. Tyrion was right about many things. I take it he's headed for the southeastern tunnels. He is, Jaime sighed. You must join him at once. I will not, father said quietly. I would be a hindrance to you. Jaime, you will lead them. I am staying to lead the rearguard, Jaime argued. Someone will have to, and, he paused. There was a strange noise. Faint but then louder. Like a scratching. And then something from the darkest nightmares of a madman appeared at the balcony. It was a spider. A giant white blue spider. It heaved its way up and then paused as far too many eyes that should ever be on a face seemed to notice them. It chittered, a horrible noise that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. He drew his sword. Several things happened next. The first was that Joffrey saw the spider and screamed. It was a high-pitched jagged noise of pure terror and he winced. The second thing was that the spider's forelegs flexed and smashed the door to the balcony with ease. And the third thing was that he could see that the spider had a rider. Another. Clegane. He bellowed the word as he sprang back, clutching at Circe. The hound sprang into the room, swore violently and then grabbed Joffrey and pulled him bodily out of the room. Father, get back. It was too late. As father tried to stand, the other jumped down off the spider and drew its sword before slashing out almost negligently. Father fell, his throat a bloody ruin. His face bore an expression of surprise. Circe was screaming something incoherent and he couldn't keep hold of her. She squirmed away, grabbed a sword from the table and aimed a blow at the other. She didn't stand a chance. Her blade met that which the other bore and shattered like glass. The other then thrust its sword deep into her chest. She fell without a word. Jaime looked at the body of his father and then at that of his sister and lover. His sword was useless. So he threw it at the face of the other and then turned to run. Something shattered behind him and then pain. Something was in his back, something cold and sharp and more terrible than he had ever thought anything could ever be, and as for the pain. He tried to scream as he fell to the floor, tried to say something, but the pain was everything and crowded everything out. He could hear other people screaming about the others being here and about whites climbing the rock as well, but the pain was everywhere. Something sliced into his neck as well and he felt his lifeblood start to gush over the floor. Everything started to darken and as it did his thoughts slowed to the speed of treacle. He was dying, he knew that now, and he hoped that Tyrion got out and that the hound had been able to join him with Joffrey. But as the darkness took him he realized, to his horror, that father and Circe had jerked themselves upright and were walking towards him. But that was as nothing to what he felt just as the life left him. There was a voice. Get up, meat creature, it seemed to hiss into every fiber of his body. Get up, meat thing. You serve us now. Now and forever. Get up. Jaime woke with a start, his head coming off the cloak that he'd wadded under his head to protect it from the tree root beneath. He sat up, brushing his hair back with shaking hands, before calming down and making his breathing return to normal. It was a dream. Just a dream. Nothing more than that. A few of the other men in his party were awake and a few gazed at him levelly as he stood and placed his blanket to one side. They had camped in a grove of trees the previous evening, not too far from the road. From the color of the sky, dawn was just minutes away, and as he looked about, the rest of the party started to bestir themselves. As for him, well, he needed a piss and he walked to the back of the weirwood tree that he had been sleeping next to. But as he passed around the trunk he saw that it was not just any tree. A face had been carved into it, untold years ago, from the state of it. It looked almost as if it was laughing at him. He stared at it, unsettled, and then he walked to one side and found a different tree to piss against. There was even a pool to one side where he could dip his hands into and use the water to wash his face and smooth his hair back. As he strode back to the others, he noticed that one or two of them watched him and then seemed to shrug a little. No one was guarding him, not really. He'd wondered about that at first, until Will, the grizzled man of the Night's Watch who had taken his orders from the old bear himself, had told him on the second day of traveling north that they did not need to guard him. You swore an oath on the Fist of Winter, boy, in the presence of the old gods. If you break that oath then you die. It's as simple as that. We've all heard what happened to Bootle, him that murdered Lord Sheristone. As to the matter of when or if you break it, the man had grinned a rather unpleasant grin. Well, there's them that are placing wagers on that. As he saddled his horse he thought about what the others thought about him again. He was the object of both fascination and scorn. An oath-breaking sister fucker seemed to be the general conclusion about him, even if they all understood why he had broken his oath to Aes. The word was spreading on that. As for his oath to Robert Baratheon, well, he still had nightmares about the revenge that the man had taken on him. That trial by combat, with him being utterly unable to lay a blade on the man, well, the nightmares kept coming. At a gesture from Will they all mounted. They were an odd lot, the odds and sods of Westeros. But one thing united them. The war. And they weren't the only ones. As they trotted out of the grove and back towards the road he could see the travelers who must have started off at least an hour or so ago. Most were headed north, but he could see the odd horse and cart headed south. All had answered the call and he winced a little as he remembered the first time that he had heard of it along with Cersei's sneer and then automatic dismissal of it, followed by a vague word about how perhaps it was some kind of strange plot by that fool Ned Stark. No, this was no plot. They swerved onto a path that ran parallel to the road to avoid a large group and then cantered past them. Will had told them the other day that they were not going to do a Stark with them, and based on Tyrion's tale of that painful ride he was grateful of that. No, he was headed north to his new life there, where he would be sneered, denigrated and perhaps eventually tolerated. If he lived that long, that is. He looked to one side at the men and women who were felling trees and brushwood for either log piles or new building work. He'd seen at least one old keep being rebuilt, the work of a house he'd never heard of before. With every mile north he rode the more uneasy he felt. He just hoped that Tyrion was coping with father. He felt like a coward for leaving his brother like that, but he had had enough by that point. And as for Cersei, he hardened his heart and put her out of his mind. Enough. No more madness, because to love her in that way had been pure madness and had destroyed both of their lives. North they rode. North to war. He could feel it. Bronn. Lord Flinters was pale with rage by the time that he left the room in which Lysa Arryn was being held. It was more than rage, it was contempt as well. Bronn observed him with a careful eye and then ushered him into his solar and poured him an ale from the jug that he'd ordered drawn for them both. There are times when you need to quaff. Now seems like an appropriate time, and ale is better to quaff than wine. The older man grunted in agreement and then quaffed mightily, before lowering his mug and wiping his mouth. By all the bloody gods, he said after a long moment, I knew that the woman was mad, but meeting her, he shook his head. The one and only time my wife met the woman, she told me afterwards that Lysa Arryn was an unstable, flighty, bitch. And Myella is not someone who usually talks like that. You met her on a good day, Bronn said dryly. On a bad day she gives insistent orders that ravens be sent at once to Winterfell to order that her son be sent south to meet her at the Eyrie in a week's time. That alone is impossible. He shook his head. Oh, she's mad. Lord Flinters quaffed a bit more and then sighed. I honor Jon Arryn as a good and decent man, who has done nothing but good for the Vale. But that said, his luck when it comes to women has been abominable. And Lysa Arryn's attempt to kill him was beyond abominable. He shook his head. I'm almost tempted to say that she should see the Eyrie again, or rather just the Moon Door. And that's something I never thought I'd say about a wife of Jon Arryn. So when does she leave for King's Landing and his judgment? A week, or so the Maester estimates. Losing her arm like that has taxed her body severely. As for what Lord Arryn plans for her, well, I have no idea. Send a raven if you need more men for the escort. The old man peered at him shrewdly. Will you take a large escort, or will a smart young fellow like you take a small, fast, easily concealed group just in case? He suppressed a smile. Oh, Flinters had his measure all right. As small and fast as possible. I was thinking about a small enclosed carriage, if need be, with her asleep from juice of the poppy. I can't imagine anyone trying to rescue her. She's hated in the Vale, and as for the Riverlands, well, I did hear that Lord Tully has disowned her. And if host a family, duty, honor, Tully disowns his own daughter, then no one in their right mind will want to rescue her. The only one who might have was Baelish, and he's dead, the slimy little bastard. Meet him, did you? At Gulltown once. Never trusted him. There was something about his face that made me want to punch him for no reason. His voice too. He peered at him. You met him, of course. He tried to bribe me with money that he didn't have. Bloody fool. But then he'd gotten away with things for so long that he probably thought that he could get away with anything. I guarded him the night before his trial, to make sure that no one from the Iron Bank had a little word with him. Longest night of my life. Flinters grunted in response before quaffing the last of his ale, so Bronn refilled his mug. The old man was brooding about something. He raised an eyebrow at him, and Flinters started slightly and then shook his head a little. Sorry, just thinking about a few things. My eldest son is leading a party to the Wall in a few days. He sighed. There's a lot of people talking about sending help to the Wall. Never thought I'd see the day when the Night's Watch was getting the kind of help it had in the old days. This call, well, I heard it, weakly at least. My sons heard it louder than I did. Their mother's family, you know. Her grandfather was of House Royce, and Bronze Yohn himself is in the north now. Gods, I'm rambling. Rambling he may have been, but all of a sudden a very shrewd pair of eyes were looking at him. The call has woken a lot of things up, Bronn. Old things. People are looking for more of such old things. You heard about some of the things that the King and Lord Stark have found. I have. Bronn sighed. Stormbreaker and the Fist of Winter. Names out of old legends. I heard that the Tyrells have found the Spear of the Gardener Kings, Otherbane, as well. I suppose that Tywin Lannister's ordered the rock upended in search of old things. The gods only know what's in Dorne, so does that mean that there's things in the Riverlands and the Vale? Runestone would have it, if the mountain clans don't, Flinters said. And the word is that the Tullys are searching old stones and other places for a shield of some kind. Something seemed to tug at the back of Bronn's mind for a long moment, but he shook it off. Well, the foxhold is old, I know that much. The lower courses of the walls are first men work. Some of the stones even have runes on them. The old lord grunted and nodded. At least you're not one of those fools that deny the call. Gods no. Seen too much to deny that. I heard that Lord Durkin denies it though, doesn't he? He did. Denying it helped to kill the young fool. He's dead. Died yesterday. He was always boasting about his pure Andal blood, not that that's possible given how crossbred all the families are these days, but he heard it, or so his wife said. He woke up from a nap screaming the words. But then he denied hearing a thing, and then when a man of the Night's Watch passed through his lands with a cage with a head in it, he tried to prove to his wife that it was all a lie, a mirish toy or something. I sense a bad end to this tale, Bronn quipped as he refilled the mugs again. What happened? The young fool stuck his finger into the cage and the white's teeth latched onto it. Bit the end clean off. And because he was an idiot he didn't clean the wound. Didn't he have his maester look at it? He'd dismissed him the week before, for talking about the call. Next thing I heard there was a red line going up his arm and he was raving nonsense. Blood poisoning, of course. Bronn thought about the chinless wonder that had been the late and unlamented Lord Durkin. What a shame. His widow is looking for a new husband. One with a chin, I presume. Lord Flinters guffawed in genuine amusement. Oh yes. He peered at Bronn. There's going to be some talk on if you might court her. He shook his head. Me? I'm too new here. Besides, I've never met the woman. So? He pulled a face. Something my father told me once. Meet the girl first, marry her once you know she's not a shrew. Wise man my father. Besides, he had his mind on someone else for a wife. It would be a challenge. Lord Flinters did not stay for much longer and eventually he left, complimenting Bronn on the ale as he departed. He seemed, not quite worried, but certainly a little preoccupied. Bron returned to his solar afterwards and sat there, his mind working through things. Gods, but he hated King's Landing. Expensive, smelled like shit, full of liars. But Lysa Arryn would have to be delivered there, alive and ready to face judgment. And who knew what Lord Arryn would do to her? And then there was the other thing that was nagging at the back of his mind, but which he couldn't put his finger on. The sun had long since set by the time he went to bed, that niggling feeling still there. As he sat on the bed with the new mattress that he'd ordered, the old one had been far too soft, it had given him a bloody backache at times. He pondered on the changes to his life so far. And then he went to bed. Afterwards he could never put his finger on what it was that woke him. A creak of the floor, the sound of a bare foot on a floorboard, it might have been anything. But suddenly he was awake. There was someone in the corridor outside his room. He got up, threw a robe over his nightshirt, picked up a knife just in case, and then went to the door, where he opened it a crack. Much to his shock, Ursula Corliss was walking down the corridor. Walking very slowly. And very nakedly. She was naked. He reeled mentally. What was she doing? What did she want? Was she there to seduce him? He'd known a high-class whore in Lannisport who'd once tried to sashay her way into his bed wearing nothing more than a flimsy piece of gauze covering her belly button, although why that needed to be covered he had no idea, and was his mind reeling that much? Oh. Ursula Corliss's eyes were open, but all he could see was the whites of her eyes. How could she walk and not see? He tossed the knife back onto the bed and then paused. She was walking past his doorway. He felt a vague sense of letdown, along with a fresh sense of bewilderment. She went on down the corridor, towards the end of it. But there was nothing there. Just a stone wall with an old entrance that had been bricked up, possibly centuries ago. On she went, slowly walking, right up until the moment that she walked into it. As collisions went, it was a very gentle one, but it still stopped her dead with a slight thud. After a long moment she said ouch very quietly before looking about in a confused manner. I think you were sleepwalking, Bron said very quietly, as he took off his robe and held it up as he knew what was about to happen. Ursula Corliss, the steward of the foxhold, froze for a long moment and then shrieked, spun partly around, panicked, plastered herself against the wall and put one hand on her ass and one on her breasts, not that that was an issue with the wall being there. Bron quickly strode forwards, draped the robe on her and then retreated quickly. There was the sound of frantic dressing. Only then did she say, in an iron voice, "What am I doing here?" "Where is here?" "The corridor outside my room." "You walked straight past my room and into that wall." "I did wonder if I should stop you, but you were, well, lacking clothes." "I don't sleepwalk," she said, sounding baffled. "Never have." "Why would I walk here?" He was tempted to say for me, but suppressed it. She was staying at the blocked-off doorway. "Why would I walk here? What's on the other side of this?" Bron asked as he joined her at the wall. "Nothing. There was a door, back about 100 years ago. It led to a stairway headed down, a wooden one, but it was an increasingly rotten one from what I read. The stone spiral staircase to the south replaced it." He frowned. "I'm amazed you could even see the corridor. Your eyes were rolled up so far in your head that you couldn't see a thing." She wrapped the robe a little more tightly around her and sent a confused look in his direction. "I'm confused. What did the old staircase lead to?" "Courtyard below. Entrance to the crypts." "The crypts," that niggling feeling returned at the back of his head. And then he nodded slightly. "Ursula, get dressed and meet me in the crypts as soon as you can." She turned to look at him, her eyes very wide at the tone of his voice, and then she nodded and turned on her heel. As his steward ran off, he went back to his room and dressed quickly, his mind racing. This was unlike anything he had known, and it was important, he could tell. Something had happened to her, some past wraith of her family was trying to tell her something, or something like that. When he entered the crypts, lantern in hand, he looked about through narrowed eyes. There was something here, he could feel it in the fucking air. But what was it? Boots scuffed on a flagstone and he looked up to see Ursula Corliss enter the crypts. She was fully dressed, was also holding a lantern and was not looking at him at all. Although there were 2 spots of red on her cheeks. Why did you want to meet me here? Her voice was rough, as if she was suppressing some very strong emotions. You were trying to get here. Or something was trying to guide you here, he replied. Something old, something that didn't know that the staircase was gone. She went white. You think that something possessed me? He shrugged. Perhaps. Possession might be too strong a word. I don't know. Does anyone, in these odd times, as the echoes of the call go out? She looked at him oddly. That was eloquent. This time he just smiled and then looked about the crypts again. There's something here. Something we've missed. But what? And that sparked a hunt. They both walked through the crypts, from one end to the other and then back again, looking, peering, poking, wondering. But there was nothing there, nothing obvious, that is. Frustrated and annoyed, he looked down the serried ranks of tombs of past Corlishs and thought furiously. There's nothing here, Ursula growled, but there has to be something. What was driving me here? He tapped a finger on the nearest tomb and then that nagging feeling at the back of his head finally slapped him around his chops. Wait, come with me. And with that he strode off to the older tombs and the one with the dust and cobwebs and the shield that was covered by those things. This is it. It must be. Obviously confused, she stared at him and then at the shield. It's an old shield. An archaic one. Look at the sword. What sword? This rusty smear. He looked at her. Don't you see it? See what? The sword has rusted to nothing. Why hasn't the shield done the same? Look how old it is. No one's borne a shield like that since the days of the first men. But it's somehow survived. How? And now she realized what he was talking about. She gave the shield a startled look. What, you think that this is the shield that the Tullys are looking for? It's on the tomb of a Corlish who bore the blood of the Muds. The Mud Kings. This has to be it. Obviously uncertain, she looked from him to the shield, to him and then back to the shield. Are you sure? I think I am. He waved a hand at it. Pick it up. It's not mine, it's yours. Mine. The look she sent his way was both baffled and made his blood boil. The blood of the Muds is within you. Not me. Take it, Ursula Corlish. There was a long moment of silence and then, with trembling hands, she reached out and picked the shield up, brushing off the dust and cobwebs that slid off in a noiseless cascade from the curved surface. I don't believe it, she said after a stunned moment. The straps are as supple as the day it was made. And with that she slid her hand into those straps. The surface of the shield seemed to brighten and then, just for a moment, brightened almost as to rival the sun. He lifted his hands to block out the light, and then when he lowered his hands he paused. Red fire seemed to burn in the eyes of Ursula Corlish, just for a moment. She looked at him. What? I think we need to send a raven to the Tullys. She nodded choppily. And then she looked at him before suddenly rushing towards him. Before he knew it, she was in his arms and her lips were on his. And all was suddenly very right with the world. Chapter 44. Chapter text. Sorry for the delay on this. It's been a rather mad few months, from a combination of my great new job and the coronavirus lockdown. I was supposed to be in New York this week and then go on a cruise from Southampton to Gibraltar for a week with my family. Neither happened. Stay safe everyone, be kind to each other and remember that this will all pass one day. Barristan. The walls of Winterfell were tall and strong and for some reason there were those runes on them. Once you knew what to look for you could spot them easily. He stared at the walls and at the stone and at the runes and then he cursed himself for being a coward and a fool. He stole a look at the godswood of Winterfell. Strange things were happening here, fey powers beyond his ken were being employed. Things were happening that had not been seen or heard of for many centuries, and he had to admit that he was shaken deeply by everything. And now here he was, standing here by the godswood, cursing himself again for being a coward and a fool. He put a hand on the pommel of his sword, stared at the walls again, noted yet another rune on a stone, and then stared at his feet for a long moment. When he looked up again he could see that Robb Stark was walking towards him from the godswood. Sir Barristan, the red-headed boy said with a respectful nod. A good day to you. And to you, Lord Robb. The Green Man would like you to join him in the Godswood. He started slightly. How had the Green Man known he was out here? Had he been looking out via the trees? What kind of powers did the man have? Something of what he was thinking must have shown on his face, because Robb Stark smiled slightly. I caught sight of you when I went into the Godswood to pray and mentioned to him that I had seen you. Ah. He ran a hand over his chin and chuckled lightly. My thanks, Lord Robb. And then he set his jaw a little and strode firmly into the Godswood. He'd been in it before, of course, but there was something about this place that still made him just a bit uneasy. It was old. Old in a way that made him aware just how young places like King Landing were. He found the Green Man sitting on a log and looking at the heart tree and that eerie face that someone or something had carved into it so long ago. As he came to a halt he sighed a little and then peered at the man who had once been Sir Duncan the Tall. The older man was lost in thought, his eyes almost half closed. After a long moment in which Barristan considered clearing his throat to announce his arrival, the Green Man seemed to return from wherever he had been and looked up at him. Barristan. He opened his mouth to reply and then he closed it again as his mind swooped like a drunken swallow. I do not know what to call you, he blurted out eventually. I always knew you as Sir Duncan, but are you an anointed knight now? What are you? A knight? A priest? A conduit for the old gods? The old man nodded and then chuckled a little. I did wonder why you were fluttering around so much, trying to talk to me and then shying away. I suppose that in a way I am all three. I am just the leader of the Green Men, Barristan. I serve the old gods, but I am still me, Barristan. He nodded choppily and then sighed a little. What you have gone through changed me in ways that I cannot even try to explain. But more of that at a different time perhaps. You have not been trying to talk to me for days now just because you do not know what I am. What do you really want to talk to me about? Barristan nodded after a long moment and then looked about for somewhere to sit down, before sitting carefully down on a tussock, his sword held out behind him. He stared at the grass beneath his feet for a long moment, seeing the lush greenery there and the little red-leafed saplings. I have been charged by His Grace the King with a single task. To make the Kingsguard. He wanted to say what it was, but he had a feeling that those words were wrong. To make the Kingsguard more effective. The words still felt wrong. The Green Man sat there for a long moment and then he ran a hand over his face. You wish to remake the Kingsguard into what it was when you first joined it. He thought about the old Kingsguard, in the days of Varys, and he found that suddenly he had no words. I do not know. I must remake it somehow and I do not know how. I remember the old days, but those days were not perhaps what I thought that they were. He hung his head in defeat. The Green Man stood suddenly and laid a hand on his shoulder. I understand. The original goal for the Kingsguard was that it would be a sworn band of brothers, a group of the finest swordsmen in all of Westeros. The hand tightened for a moment. That goal was a noble one. And it died almost from the first days of the Kingsguard. The corruption was there, right from the start. Too many nobles realized that a place on the Kingsguard for a brother or a son was a wonderful way to try and influence the king. Not overtly, or directly, but it was always there. And then there were the other ways to corrupt the men themselves. Gold. Power. Other influences. Oh, Kristen Cole was always the exception that man's armor should have been black from corruption, but you and I both know that the Kingsguard was corrupt. It was in my day, even if there were those who did their best to try and hide it. I became the Lord Commander to help my king, who was also my friend. I thought that Drold Hightower was worthy. I was wrong, as Lyanna Stark found out. Yes, I know what happened. They all betrayed their oaths. Barristan nodded, despair in his heart. Then my task is impossible. I did not say that. Recognize the problem for what it is. Change the Kingsguard. You have an opportunity that I did not. Members of the Kingsguard were appointed by a queen who betrayed her husband right from the start of their marriage. Change is now inevitable. Dismiss the unworthy and seek out and find others that are worthy. And if someone wants to join the Kingsguard, look askance at them and wonder why. Choose the talented but genuinely reluctant. Does the Kingsguard have to be for life? What about a year? 2 years. 5 years. You can change things. He thought about what the green man had said for a long moment and then he nodded slowly. The despair faded a little and a small amount of hope kindled in his heart. You might be right. I will think on it. Think carefully. He sighed and then shook his head. I cannot imagine doing what those 3 fools did on the orders of Robb Targaryen. Cruel madness. The green man walked back to his log and sat down on it. Arthur Dane regretted it. Of the 3, he was the one who most knew that it was beyond wrong. He thought of Arthur, his old friend. The man had been deadly with that blade of his, but always ready with a smile and a quip. Arthur. Truth be told, I always wondered about how he was defeated. Lord Stark is a mighty warrior, but Sir Arthur Dane, with Dawn in his hand, was a bladesman like no other. The blade. I will not say betrayed him. It was the other way around. It rejected him as unworthy. No longer the sword of the morning. I can show you if you like. He peered at the older man in some confusion. I don't understand. The green man stood again, walked over to the heart tree and laid one hand on it, before extending the other at him. Take my hand. He swallowed. And then he stood and grasped the scarred hand that was proffered in his direction. Darkness fell and he fell with it. Down he fell, and he had no idea how far or for how long. But then suddenly there was ground beneath his feet again and then light about him. The ground was burnt red by the sun, which was going down in the west. There were mountains and hills all around. Where was he? It had to be Dawn, or the border between the Stormlands and Dawn. He looked about wildly. The green man was standing to one side, looking up at a half-ruined tower that was nearby. It had a door on it and there was a man sitting on a rock not far from it. The Tower of Joy, the green man said with utter contempt in his voice. Also Robb Targaryen named it after he lost both his honor and his wits. Let us see who guards it. And with that he strode off towards the guard. After a long moment Barristan joined him, noting with interest that their feet did not disturb the red earth. Are we really here? They cannot see us. They cannot. Few can. Sometimes those who are touched by the old gods, or other powers, can sense our presence when we look into the past, but not enough to see us. As they drew near the man on the rock, his feet faltered a little. Arthur. It was Arthur Dane. Dawn was at his hip but he did not touch it. His white cloak was smeared with red from the earth, his armor was unpolished in places and there was a look of utter despair on his face. What is wrong with him? Barristan asked eventually, but he knew what the answer would be. He knows he is no longer a knight, the green man responded, confirming his suspicions. He knows that he is damned. He sighed and then nodded as he looked at his long-dead friend. And then he looked up as the door in the tower opened and a familiar figure passed through it. Oswell went. He too looked a little shabby, but the look on his face was merely tiredness and resignation. Arthur, there's food inside, Went muttered. Stew. I'm not hungry, Arthur replied tiredly. You have to eat. Why? Went shook his head in exasperation. If you do not eat then you will die. That would be a mercy. Feet scuffed on a lintel and as Barristan looked up Drold Hightower loomed into view. The white bull looked as the other two did, tired and a little dirty, but there was a look on his face that Barristan recognized. That look of thundering rectitude that only Drold Hightower could get away with. Sir Arthur, you must eat. And then we will spar. You must hone your skills. Arthur's head drooped a bit as he closed his eyes for a moment. No, he said eventually. I must not. I cannot. And I am no sir. None of us are. Hightower stared at him and then set his chin a little. More of this foolishness. That and more. We are not knights. Not after what we have done. Arthur Went said with reluctant misery in his voice, enough. We did what was ordered by our prince, Hightower said in a voice like iron. It is not our place to judge him. His words earned him a disgusted laugh from Arthur. Really? You choose to use those words yet again? Do you remember the words of our oaths as knights, Drold? We were charged to protect the innocent. That girl up there was an innocent. Was. We failed to protect her from a rapist. There. I have said the unspoken word out loud, the word that we have not been able to say until now. Our prince raped that girl. Forced a child on her. And now he is dead and we are damned. So yes. I have judged him. Hightower's face mottled with rage, but then he seemed to force himself to calm a little. You know nothing of what? No, nothing. We are no longer knights, gentlemen. Arthur stilled. Not anymore. He flexed his right hand. I cannot spar with you anymore. I dare not. He looked down at his hand and then pulled off his gauntlet. I cannot. And then he held up his hand and the long red burn mark across his palm. The other two Kingsguards stared at it, as did Barristan. Sir Arthur, what have you done to your hand? Hightower barked, visibly shocked. Me. Nothing. Arthur held his hand out. That was from Dawn. The sword is rejecting me. It knows that I am no longer the sword of the morning. He hung his head for a long moment, before pulling his hand down. Went and Hightower stared at him and then at each other. Arthur Went said, confused, swords cannot reject their wielders. They are just objects. Dawn is not. Arthur ran a shaking hand over his face. You do not understand. And I cannot explain. The blade is old. Older than anything you can imagine. And it is not normal. It was made by the first men in the days of the long winter. And that is all I can say. You would not understand anyway. Dawn is rejecting me. Bearing it is painful. Holding it is even more painful. Should Ned Stark come here after his sister, then you too must face him. I cannot. If I harm him, then Dawn will, that will be the final straw for it. Dane Hightower said, pulling a face of strained fury. Cease your prattle and make sense again. And do not think to give your Lord Commander orders. I have no choice. And do you really think that we are still Kingsguard? We are lost. We are damned. We are walking dead men. He looked down at the sword and smiled bitterly. Whites in all but name. And then he closed his eyes tightly. Dane Hightower roared. We are Kingsguard. We guard the babe. He is our king. The babe is a bastard. And the girl is dying. We have failed her. The girl has played her part. And with that Dane stood quickly, his hand on the hilt of Dawn, a snarl on his face. After a moment he pulled his hand away and then looked down at it again, before holding it out again. The red line was longer, redder and angrier. You never were a very good knight, Hightower Arthur said, before looking over at the track. And now our time is at an end. They come. Barristan stared in the same direction. Red dust was billowing up in the distance. Riders were coming. Hightower went pale but then set his jaw. Sirs, we must protect our king. No, Arthur said with an infinite weariness in his voice. It's time for us to die. Ned Stark will lead them. It's time for us to pay for our sins. He put his gauntlet back on. Dane Hightower grunted through gritted teeth. But Arthur Dane just shook his head at them both. I will fight. But we are all going to die. And then, just for a heartbeat, he looked right into Barristan's eyes and winced just a little. Barristan stared at the three men, Hightower pale with fury, Arthur slumped in resignation and went torn between the two, and he knew that Arthur was right. Lord Eddard Stark was riding towards them, his face pale with fury, men with hard faces at his back. The Green Man looked at them all with sadness in his eyes. And of them all only two will survive. Lords Stark and Reed. We must leave this place and the ghosts of the dead. And then, with a shocking suddenness, they were back in the Godswood. He all but reeled around as he stared at the trees. What, did Arthur see me? Perhaps. Perhaps not. He might have seen us as a shadow, a distant shape. Or perhaps he saw me and knew that the old gods were touching him in that moment, one last time. Arthur was a follower of the Seven though. For the Danes the matter of the gods has always been complicated. Because of Dawn. During the fight at the Tower of Joy it came down to Arthur Dane and Ned Stark. Dane's hand was a mass of burns by that point. The moment he wounded Lord Stark the sword was finished with him. He gestured at the pool, and for a moment the image of a white-faced Arthur Dane appeared in it, sinking to his knees, clutching at his right hand, which seemed to be smoking, whilst Ned Stark pulled his sword up and around for what would obviously be the death blow. And then it was gone. Barristan sat down again, shaking more than a bit. Yes, the King's Guard needed to change indeed. Jon Arryn. He was coming to the conclusion that Stannis Baratheon had uncovered a gem in Sir Davos Seaworth. A rough-cut gem, who was far too humble given his undoubted talents, but a gem. Right now that gem was standing in front of him, next to a red-faced Lord Hayes Moxton and his exceptionally ugly son and heir Boros. Seaworth was stone-faced and the Moxtons were squirming with a combination of fear